All right, we are here for another debate. This time around, we are going to be talking with Nick Sayers and TurretinFan and asking the question, what should the proper translation or the proper text of Revelation 16 verse 5 be? Should it be shalt be, as in the King James Version, or shall it be holy, as in many of the other versions? So this is what we are talking about tonight. We have a moderated, structured debate for you all. The format is going to be as follows. We are going to have opening statements. They will be 15 minutes each, 15 minutes from Nick, 15 minutes from TurretinFan. We will then have the rebuttal stage, which will be 10 minutes for Nick and 10 minutes for TurretinFan. And then we will have a cross-examination period of 10 minutes. Once the cross-examination period is done, we will have our closing statements. They will be 5 minutes each. And then we will have a live Q&A afterwards. The time for the Q&A will be determined as things go in the debate. And that's where we are going to be for today. So we're going to have a good debate, a good friendly, brotherly debate. Am I right, Nick? And am I right, TurretinFan?
Absolutely.
Don't make me pull all the moderator stuff. I'm just kidding. All right, I know it's going to be a good one.
Can I just butt in there, Dwayne? Sorry to do some housekeeping.
Yes.
Me and TurretinFan were sort of behind the scenes chatting, and we thought maybe the opening statements could go for 20 minutes and the rebuttals for 15. So it's just an extra 5 minutes on the first two. They were opening statements 15 minutes, but yeah, it seems a little bit short. We both sort of agreed with that, but I think I sent you a list of times, and so maybe I'll resend a new list to you. And but that's the only bit of housework that I thought needed to be worked out.
Okay, perfect. So you've heard them, folks. It's going to be 20 minutes for the opening statements and 15 minutes for the rebuttals. So with that being said, if you have questions that you want to ask for the Q&A live, tag me in the comments below and put a Q in front of it, and then I will flag those to be looked at later during the Q&A period. Depending on how many comments there will be, will determine whether or not I am able to get to them. I will be kind of looking through them to see which ones I think are more interesting, and I will be putting the more interesting ones first, and then we'll go down the line from there. So I think with that being said, I think we've pretty much covered everything. So we're going to go ahead and give Nick Sayers the opening remarks for the opening statement. So let me just fix my timer here. You've got 20 minutes. I will give you a 1 minute warning when you are down to the last minute. Go ahead, Nick.
Okay, thanks, Dwayne. I will share my screen. Present, share screen. Okay. Yes, so Revelation 16:5, it's a very interesting topic, and I just want to say from the outset that I'm really glad to be debating TurretinFan on this. I've had two previous debates on this topic, and I found that the opponents really didn't know much about this topic, and so would talk about other things. But TurretinFan has done his due diligence and read through my book and gone through a whole bunch of material, read through commentaries, and so I'm very glad that he's done this. And so it should be a very good debate. It should be very informative, and I think if anyone wants to know about this topic or get a grounding on this topic, this debate will be a highlight for them to get information on this. So the issue here is represented in these two Bible versions. So James White also has this type of picture in his book where it has, "O Lord," or it has, and I heard the angel of the water say, "Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and wast and shalt be, because thou hast judged thus." So the NASB has, "And I heard the angel of the water saying, Righteous are you, who are and who were, O Holy One, because you judge these things." So the main difference that we're talking about tonight is "and shalt be" versus "O Holy One." So the place that I want to go to in explaining this is Dan Wallace explained in his Credo course. He said, imagine we came across an early manuscript copy of the Constitution of the United States. And the preamble said, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect onion. If we were to see that line, we would know that union was the original word and not onion. And so obviously they're talking about bringing the union together, not talking about a cooking class. And so sometimes there are things that are so obvious that they don't really need to be said. Once you know certain pieces of information, things fall in line, and context is always king. And so what we see, this is the front page of the King James Bible. We see the name of Jehovah. And so this is a very important thing to know and understand. The name of Jehovah is a very important name in the Bible. Now, obviously, we as Christians, we know that Jesus has a name above every name, but we believe Jesus is Jehovah. And so it's very important. Now, I believe that the name of God is Jehovah and not Yahweh. And so in my book, I do go into how Yahweh is from Jupiter, Yahweh Pitta, which I think is an erroneous way of saying the name of God. I think it's proven in the theophoric names that the name of God is Jehovah, with so many people in the Bible with Yeho in front of their name. And sometimes after their name. I think this is a very important thing to look at. And that would be another good debate to have. Is the name of God Jehovah or is it Yahweh? But I don't want to go too much into that tonight. So this Bible here is actually Elijah Hutter. So in 1599, he did a dodecaglot, which is a 12 language Bible. And he has here the 5 triadic declarations. And so oftentimes we're reading through the book of Revelation, it says the one who was and is to come, this type of thing. Now we see the first one here, I've underlined it and it's in red there. Now the second one where it's underlined in green, that's the word Jehovah. So this is his Hebrew New Testament. This is the book of Revelation 1:4. And so 1:4 here has John saying it. Now it doesn't have the name of Jehovah there, but we see in 1:8 when Jesus is talking, it actually does have the name of Jehovah here. It's quite amazing. So it has Jehovah, and then it has who is and was and is to come. Then we look at 4:8. It has Jehovah here, and it has the triadic declaration here. We look at 11:17. It has Jehovah and the triadic declaration. And then we see Revelation 16:5, and it's got the same type of pattern with Jehovah and the triadic declaration. So sometimes when I'm explaining this type of stuff in English, people can miss this. But usually around the name of Jehovah is this declaration. So what is this declaration? Well, if we just read something like Adam Clarke's, that might be a little bit small for people to read, but I'll encourage you to pause that and zoom it in for your later study. But I won't read through the whole thing, but it just says in Adam Clarke's commentary on Revelation 1:4, it says this phraseology is purely Jewish and probably taken from the Tetragrammaton, Jehovah, which is supposed to include in itself all time, past, present, and future. Okay. And so what I've discovered in Exodus 3:14, there are 3 I ams that are mentioned. Now, Jehovah, which is in verse 15, is usually translated as Lord in the King James. But if we look at these 3 I ams, we see the ye of Yeh in the first I am means he will be. The Hov of Hova comes, it means he is, and the A of Haya means he was. So you've got 3 I ams, and it means the past, the present, and the future. And so Jehovah is an archaic third person singular of the imperfective aspect of the verb to be, is, was, and will be. So the building blocks of the name of Jehovah are these 3 I ams, which is very interesting. It's very important. And so I've interviewed Nehemiah Gordon, who's an expert in the Hebrew language, on my platform, and he talks about this at length. He says Haya is he who was, and so you can see with the yellow here, it's got those particular parts of the Hebrew language. It's got Hova, he who is, and Yeh, he who will be. And so I've written down here the Yeh of Yeh is he will be, the Hov in Hova he is, and the Yah of Haya he was. Okay, and so we can see those points there. When we put them all together, it means and it sounds Jehovah. Okay, so this is a very important thing to know and understand, because not only is that the building blocks of the name Jehovah, but it's exactly what Revelation 16:5 says. Revelation 16:5 says, who is and was and shall be. And so here we have, he is and was and who will be. This is the building blocks of the etymology of Jehovah. So it's a very important thing. So, and just one example of this, this is from TurretinFan's site. So I've just done a screenshot here, but it says here, and this description, so I was talking about the which is and was and is to come. This description of the Father relates to that of Exodus 14, I am that I am. And then it says, the title of Jehovah taketh up these three, Je, the future time, Ha, the time present, and Va, the time past. So this was quite well known to people in the Reformation and post-Reformation period. So people like Theodore Beza, he knew this very well. All of the King James translators, they knew this type of thing very well. So when they saw in Revelation 16:5 the three aspects, the past, the present, and the future, they knew that that was the name of God. So it was very important. So even to the point where even in Strong's, for example, and other things that are numbered to Strong's like Spiros Hiates, he has just one Strong's number for this whole name. So Ho'un Kaho'en Kaho'ekomenos, it has down the bottom here, which art is was, and which wast is was, and art is to come shalt be. And so, but that proves that it is a name. It is the name of Jehovah. Okay, so it's also a chiastic structure. So this is quite an interesting thing. So you can see in the Greek here, it has the very similar wording. Now, of course, the last word that we're debating is esomenos. So it's different to the previous four, but you can see the pattern is very similar. So what we see, what we see in English here is which is and was and is to come. So we see the present, then we see the past, and then we see the future. So I've written it down here, present tense, past tense, future tense. But what we see in the middle is the past, the present, and the future. So the tenses are changed in the middle. And this is typical of a chiastic structure. So this is just a very interesting thing to look into. Now, knowing that it's the name of God, knowing that Jehovah is the name of God, when we look at the Bible and we look at nomina sacra, there are four main, I call them Mount Rushmore examples of nomina sacra. So the four beginning words or names, these are the ones that were changed into nomina sacra form first. So it was Kyrios, which means Lord, Theos is God, Jesus, which is Jesus, and Christos, which is Christ. So the earliest manuscripts and documents and early church writers that we have access to, they were using these first. And then later on, Jerusalem, David, Mary sometimes, and everything sort of ended up with the nomina sacra form. That there ended up like being about 15. But the first original four were these ones here. So we know that the main name, the most important name to the Jews was Jehovah. Okay. So we would always think that that would be in a nomina sacra form, even to the point where I'll just get this website up if I can find it. When we look at, say, Matthew 1:1, This is a Greek New Testament. They've got a whole bunch of very interesting, I'll just zoom that in, very interesting, like Papyrus 1, it has Vivlos, Genesios, Jesu Christu, Wio David, and it's missing there, but it has Wio Abraham. Then Codex Sinaiticus, then Vaticanus, and it goes through from the dates. Now, if you notice this nomina sacra here of Jesus, Yesu, with the line above it, you would be hard pressed to find a manuscript without that. Even in the Byzantine era, they are all contracted. So you see Yesu, but it would just say Iu if you were to just read it like that. But of course, we understand that you have to unpack the nomina sacra. So when we go through all these, they're all like that. I couldn't find one manuscript that wasn't like that. Now, we know when it came to the print press, Erasmus, he has Jesus there, Jesus, Yesu. Then when it came to Stephanus's 1546, he actually has a nomina sacra there. But then in his latter editions, he expands it to Jesus as well in the Greek. Now, the nomina sacra, we know when we see it in a manuscript, we know to unpack it. And so my case is that it just took a while in the Reformation period to understand that the name of God, which is usually Kurios, it took a while to understand that this whole complete name, the noun phrase, was a holy name. And not only a holy name, but probably the holiest name in the whole New Testament. We know that Bibles will capitalize I am in when Jesus is talking. You know, Jesus said I am, and they'll put capitals there because they understand and recognize, well, that's the name of God. Well, here, the people in the Reformation period recognized that this was the name of God. And Theodore Beza, he recognized this, he understood this, and he mentions this in his annotations. And so when we look at something like, I've actually got this on my website, and this is translated by TurretinFan, actually. So he clearly says here, but with John, there remains a completeness where the name of Jehovah, the Lord, is used, as we said before. So this is at Revelation 16:5. So he tells us to go to Revelation 1:4. And in Revelation 1:4, he's explaining how Jehovah is related to the I ams, that it is a holy name. And so to me, it just makes sense that once this was recognized that this is a holy name, they would, how would you contract a nomina sacra? Like something of the size of Kurios, as we saw with our example here. These ones here, they're quite easy to do. All you do is you gut the middle letters and you have the first letter and the last letter. It's quite an easy thing. You put a line above it. It's a bit like when we have do not and it becomes don't. We put a little tag there to let people know that we've contracted something. But when you have ho'on kaho en kaho esomenos, how do you contract that? Do you have the first letter and the last letter? You're missing quite a lot of information there. And so to me, it makes sense that the scribes put holy there, holy indicating that this is a holy name of God, probably the most holy name of God in the whole New Testament. Now, in the Old Testament, we understand that when they were doing the Septuagint, whether you think it's AD or BC document, it doesn't really matter for my point, but they were putting that in a nomina sacra form as well. So they would translate Jehovah as Kurios and put it in this type of form. And so we know that scribes were doing this with the New Testament. They're doing it with the Old Testament. So it makes sense to think that someone who saw this type of thing, they saw the one who is and was and shall be. They went, this is a holy name. And so they put holy there. Now, that's my main case. And in my book, I go in depth and talk about that. I talk about many people explaining this in their annotations or in their commentaries, like Adam Clark and other people. But Theodore Beza also says in his annotations that he had access to an ancient manuscript of good faith. And so when we read through his annotations here, he says, and so without doubting this genuine writing in this ancient manuscript, I faithfully restored in the good book what was certainly there, her esomenos. And so he's saying, so my first argument is that it is a type of nomina sacra because it's a holy name. That's why holy was put there. And so to me, this was most likely understood by people in the early church, Greek writers, because that they were very interested in the name of God. So when it has who was and is to come, they would say, well, this is the name of Jehovah. Now, obviously, the first 4 places where it has who was and is to come is not exactly like Revelation 16:5. And so I'll just get my little screen happening here, this one here. So we see it was and is to come. Okay, so we see that 4 times, and then shall be is the final one. The is to come is sort of like the past, the present, and then an event. It's a bit like saying the past, the present, and Christmas. But shall be is future for eternity. And so that's why I believe that this was that holy was put there. Now, when we look at Revelation 11:17, the art to come is taken completely off. So we see that as well. When we look at Revelation 4:8, we see that there were 9 extra holies, say in some of the, I'm pretty sure it's Sinaiticus. It has holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. So it's got 9 extra holies there. And I think that's a clear indication that they're saying this is holy, this type of name is holy, but it's also related to in Isaiah, where Isaiah saw the Lord and said, holy, holy, holy. But it's there 9 times. And then when we look at Revelation 1:8, the word God is introduced there, which is not in the Textus Receptus. And Revelation 1:4, it's quite interesting because Erasmus has a reading there that some people say it's a solecism. But clearly, if you understand that it's a name, there's no solecism there. And so this is what people said. It's a name. So the whole thing is a name. So if you have if you have a name of someone, you wouldn't just chop it up and change it. You would include all aspects of the name. And so what we see is some of these old manuscripts, they have holy, 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 this type of thing. But we don't put that in our modern Bibles. We see that as sort of nonsensical. I think I've got a very good case to say we have the past, the present, and the future. If we saw Jesus Christ yesterday, today, and forever, if it had yesterday, today, and holy, you'd think, oh, it's got the past, the present, and just some other thing there. You would investigate that. And so that's what I'm saying here. Revelation 16:5, if you investigate it, you find out that this is a sacred name. It's the name of Jehovah. It's the 3 I Ams. To me, this is a very strong case for the validity of the Textus Receptus and the King James Version.
All right, you got 5 seconds left. All right, we'll hand that over to TurretinFan. So if you want to go ahead and as soon as you begin your presentation, I will start the timer for you. Or you've got your own timer. Look at that.
Thanks so much. The angel of the waters said, and John heard Hosios, or perhaps Chesed, if it was in Hebrew that the angel spoke and John heard. And John wrote by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit and command of Jesus Christ, Hosios. Therefore, Beza was wrong to replace Hosios with Asomenos, and the King James translators ought not to have followed Beza's reading. Today's debate is significant because of Revelation's warning against adding to or diminishing from God's word. Today's debate is also significant because this is one of the places where the evidence is overwhelmingly against the King James text. There's plenty of places where that's not the case, but this is one where the evidence is overwhelmingly against the King James text. In fact, unlike most textual variants, we can pinpoint the particular document that introduced this textual variant into the textual tradition, a manual markup by Theodore Beza of his own previous printed edition. His second edition, he hand marked it up, and that created the third edition after he added annotations and so forth. The external and internal evidence could hardly be any stronger than they are in this example. The external evidence. The overwhelming majority of Greek manuscripts, including the 4 earliest manuscripts, have hosios. The few that don't have hosios don't substitute esomenos for hosios. The same is true of the translations of the Bible before the age of printing. Syriac, Armenian, Georgian, Ethiopic. Multiple Old Latin translations, Jerome's Vulgate and Old Church Slavonic, have an equivalent of hosios. There's 2 branches of Coptic, one of which has the equivalent of hosios, one which doesn't. Likewise, Arabic appears to have the equivalent of hosios. On the other hand, one Middle English version does not have the equivalent of hosios, but it also doesn't replace it with the equivalent of esomenos. The same is true of the commentaries on the text. The commentaries, whether in Greek or in any other language, either reflect the presence of the word hosios, or, if they don't reflect esomenos as a substitute for hosios. Aside from the commentaries, there are no patristic quotations of the text of Revelation 16:5 that I could find. In 1505, Erasmus published Lorenzo Valla's comments on Revelation 16:5. As published by Erasmus in 1505, Valla seems to be suggesting that his Greek manuscript of Revelation had hagios, not hosios. As there's no such manuscript tradition, my suspicion is that Valla or Erasmus had notes in Latin and back translated from sanctus to the more common Greek word hagios, which is usually the word that corresponds to sanctus. That's not to suggest that there's no textual difficulty with hosios in Revelation 16:5. There are a cluster of variant readings, all including hosios, presumably because using the adjective hosios with an article is not standard Greek. In fact, this bothered Beza, who called attention to this issue when arguing for his substitution of esomenos for hosios. This, of course, leads us to the question of the internal evidence. Before I get there, let me add, yes, it is a little irregular to use an adjective with an article, but the reason to do it is because I think we'll come to that a little bit more on the internal evidence side. But there's a valid reason for doing so, and we could point out that even more so, it's odd to use an article with a finite verb, which is when we translate it in English, it doesn't show up, but the Greek is the being one. So an article with the present participle, then an article with the imperfect indicative, not a participle, not an article with a participle, but an article with an indicative. That's really odd in Greek, and has also led to some variants and so forth. And then finally, in this case, after that pair of verbs comes hosios. Now, in there's 4 previous places where that pair shows up, and in 3 of those, what comes after is an article with a participle, the coming one, erchomenos. So that's in 3 of the previous. There's a 4th one without it in the majority of Greek texts. The King James is based on a text that has it there as well, and Beza's text had it there as well. But let's turn from the external to the internal. Revelation 13 had introduced to us that the beast demanded everyone's worship and killed those who didn't worship him. Revelation 14 warned of the coming judgment for the beast worshippers. Revelation 15 introduces 7 angels with 7 bowls full of the wrath of God. Revelation 16 then provides discussion of these 7 angels pouring out these bowls of God's wrath. Revelation 15, 2-4 says this, "And I saw, as it were, a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God. And they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, Great and marvelous are thy works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are thy ways, thou King of," and it should say ages here, "who shall not fear thee, O Lord, and glorify thy name, for thou alone art holy. For all nations shall come and worship before thee, for thy judgments are made manifest." The word translated holy there, and thou only art holy, is the word hagios. It's the only other time that John uses the word hagios. And the word is used only a few other times in the New Testament, namely Acts 2:27, because thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. And then Acts 13:34-35. And as concerning that he raised him up from the dead, now no more to return to corruption, he said on this wise, I will give you the sure mercies, that's hagios, of David. Wherefore he says also in another psalm, thou shalt not suffer thine Holy One, again, that's hagios, to see corruption. And then 1 Timothy 2:8, I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands, that's hagios, without wrath and doubting. Titus 1:8, but a lover of hospitality, a lover of good men, sober, just, holy, that's hagios, temperate. Hebrews 7:26, for such an high priest became us, who is holy, that's hagios, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and made higher than the heavens. It may not be immediately obvious, but hagios carries the sense of keeping the covenant. That's the same meaning as the Hebrew chesed, or otherwise being religiously correct. That's why the word is translated as Holy One in Acts 2:27 and 13:35, but as sure mercies in Acts 13:34, both of which are quoting from the Old Testament, where the Hebrew word is either chesed or hasid, depending on it's the same consonants, but of course different vowels. Psalm 16:10, Holy One, hasid, and Isaiah 55:3, mercies, chesed. Paul and the author of Hebrews, not quoting from the Old Testament, use the word in its more general sense of religious correctness. So in Hebrews, it's talking about the high priest that is holy in the sense that he does his religious service correctly. Men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands, means that these are people who are worshiping correctly. And similarly, in Titus 1:8, lover of hospitality, lover of good men, and so forth. Following the idea there of being holy is following religious observance properly. But in Acts 2 and Acts 13, where the Old Testament's quoted, the Holy One there refers to the person who keeps covenant. And that's why you see this connection to the sure mercies of David. What does it mean, the sure mercies of David? It means that he has made a promise to David and he's going to keep it. And so the Holy One there points us towards Jesus. It's one of his names. In context, in Revelation 15, the word hagios is connected with God's covenant-keeping duty of bringing judgment on those who hurt his covenant people. As it's written, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, I will repay. Thus it does not carry its more general sense of religious correctness as in the epistles, but rather it refers to the covenantal relationship between God and his people. In Revelation 16, the angels pour out their bowls of wrath. The third angel is described this way, Revelation 16, 4-7. And the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of waters, and they became blood. And I heard the angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous. The King James adds, O Lord, which art and wast, O Holy One, because thou hast judged thus. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. And I heard another out of the altar say, Even so, Lord God Almighty, true and righteous are thy judgments. The voice from the altar seems to allude to the martyrs mentioned with reference to the fifth seal back in Revelation 6, 9-11, where the martyrs cried with a loud voice for God's vengeance, and they were located under the altar. The text says, And when he had opened the fifth seal, this is Revelation 6, 9-11, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? And white robes were given unto every one of them. And it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were, should be fulfilled. And you can see that this time has come now in Revelation 16. The people who were persecuted to death by the beast in the previous chapter before Revelation 16, well, actually Revelation 14, though they're now receiving their judgment for having filled up the blood of the people that are mentioned in Revelation 6. These previous martyrs from Revelation 6 are now joined by those who had victory over the beast. Remember, anyone who didn't worship the beast is killed, according to the text in 14. So they're now joining these previous martyrs in Revelation 6. And together they're crying out that God has now shown his justice. He's now been true to his word and given the justice that they were asking for in their previous prayers. The parallel between true and righteous are thy judgments in Revelation 16, and just and true are thy ways in the Song of chapter 15 should be immediately apparent. So remember that they say in Revelation 16, they say, let's see, righteous are you, O Holy One, because you have judged thus. And let's see if I have the rest of the text in front of me somewhere here. I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that. No, here it is. Yes. So you are righteous, O Lord, which art and wast, O Holy One, because you have judged thus, for they have shed the bloods of the saints and prophets. But before that, the third angel had poured out his vial on the rivers and given the rivers became blood. That's why they say you've given them blood to drink, is the rivers became blood. And then he heard another voice in the altar saying, even so, Lord God Almighty, true and righteous are thy judgments. So true and righteous are thy judgments, pointing us back towards Revelation 15, which says that just and true are thy ways, thou King of ages. Who will not fear thee, O Lord, and glorify thy name? For you are only holy, for all nations shall come and worship before thee, because thy judgments are made manifest. And now there is this manifestation of his judgments, because he's given them just what they deserved. They shed blood, and now they're being given blood to drink. So that's the pattern there, and the word hagios here in Revelation 16 is one of several parallels back to Revelation 15:4. And thus, although Revelation 15:4 is a bit unique in having the word hagios, Revelation 16 having the word hagios is excellent in terms of connecting back to 15:4 and completing the parallels that are there. So it's the reason that it's hagios there, not hagios, although hagios would also be okay given the Revelation 6 use of hagios, but hagios is even better because it's relating to his covenant faithfulness. He's now protecting the people of his covenant. Let's see. So, yes, in short, referring to God as the one who is hagios here makes sense because this is the fulfillment of God's promise of judgment on those who hurt his people. And there's an additional parallel problem to be addressed. The phrase preceding hagios is found similarly in 4 other passages, and Nick's already alluded to this. Revelation 1:4, 1:8, and 11:17 have the phrase ho'on kai ho'en, and Revelation 4:8 has the phrase ho'en kai ho'on. God as the being one, ho'on, and he who has been, ho'en, are divine titles, like ego I me, I am. And they are connected to the Tetragrammaton, Yod-He, Vav-He, pronounced as Jehovah or Yahweh. Different people pronounce it different ways, but Nick's been arguing for one over the other. So, in itself, of course, these previous uses of ho'on, kai ho'en, or ho'en, kai ho'on, these would seem to be basically irrelevant to the wording here. But what makes it relevant is that Beza believed that in all 4 of those previous instances, the phrase had been followed by ho erkomenos, the coming one. It's a present participle of to come with an article. It has been tempting to commentators to link the present participle of to be and the imperfect indicative of the verb to be together with the coming one to form a sort of past, present, future set. Especially because sometimes to come is sometimes used as a paraphrastic way of talking about the future. That is true, that sometimes is done. Moreover, the Tetragrammaton has been taken by many as having, including, or at least being based on a future sense. In fact, some people have translated Exodus 3:14 not as I am, like the King James has, but as I shall be, making some kind of reference to the future seem fitting to people who have that understanding. However, Beza was wrong to believe that all four previous instances were followed by the expression the coming one. Although a minority of manuscripts do have the coming one in Revelation 11:17, the majority of manuscripts quite properly do not have that title there. The reason is it's not proper to have it there because in Revelation 11, God has already come in judgment. And for the same reason, of course, such a title is not appropriate in the mouth of the angel in Revelation 16 because judgment has already begun to have been meted out, as Beza himself recognized. Beza recognized the impropriety of including hoarkomenos here, but still felt it was not right to leave the being one and he who has been without a third partner, and so he substituted isomenos for hosios. It's unclear why he didn't just insert it, why he felt the need to substitute. He doesn't explain it. People have speculated that's because there's some similarity in the word, the look of the words. Beza's annotations say that this is a reading that was, quote, restored from an old reliable manuscript. It is possible that such a manuscript once existed, or even still exists. Well, many things are possible. What is startling, however, is that no one who has collated manuscripts of Revelation, including Hosker, who collated almost all the manuscripts that were known before World War II, no one has ever seen such a manuscript. On top of that, Beza is not known to have personally possessed any Greek manuscripts of Revelation, and Henry Stephanus, who collated manuscripts in that time, seems to have provided collation notes to Theodore Beza, but his published apparatus notes one textual variant at Revelation 16:5, but not this variant at Revelation 16:5. It's believed that Stephanus had additional textual variants in his unpublished collation notes, but that document itself seems to have been lost. Ultimately, while it makes for an interesting historical question whether Beza's annotations mischaracterize the manuscript record, it's essentially a moot point. Even if such a manuscript existed, we would not find such a manuscript a persuasive reason to overturn all the rest of the manuscripts and versions, nor would we find such a reading persuasive on internal grounds. After all, the conjugation esomenos never appears in the New Testament. Septuagint Job seems to use the word once, but not as a title of God. The use of esomenos as potentially a divine title seems to have its origins in the Christian adoption of Greek philosophy, particularly in this instance, Plato's Timaeus. Aldo Minutio printed Plato's collected works first in 1513, even before Erasmus' first edition of the New Testament in 1516. We know that Beza read Plato. Jeffrey Mallinson states, despite these negative sentiments, there are other instances in which Beza speaks positively of Plato. This practice follows a Renaissance trend to harmonize Plato and Aristotle. An important example of this harmonization is found in Jean Desserres' 3-volume edition of the works of Plato, which contains translation and accompanying explanation of the text. A Latin poem lauding Plato and Desserres, composed by Beza, is affixed to the first volume. Also at Desserres' request, Beza passed on a copy of the Platonis Opera, the works of Plato, to Peter Young. In short, Hosios is, Peter Young is the tutor of Scotland's James VI. So in short, I think we should not go with Beza's substitution here and instead stick with Hosios.
All right. So there are our two opening statements. I hope you were able to catch a lot of good stuff from those. I certainly did. So now what we're going to do is we are going to move in to the rebuttals. We are going to have a 15-minute rebuttal from Nick Sayers first, and then a 15-minute rebuttal from TurretinFan. So I will go ahead and turn this over to Nick for his rebuttal, and we'll begin his timer as soon as he begins speaking.
Okay, thanks for that, TurretinFan. So I think one of the issues here is that there is internal evidence and there is external evidence. And so we're looking at a lot of internal evidence with the name of Jehovah, with the 3 I Ams, this type of thing. But there is also external evidence that TurretinFan has brought up. So the text of Theodore Beza. So I might just share my screen here. Here is David Paris. So David Paris, he did a Latin commentary on the Book of Revelation in 1611. And then this is a translation of that into English in 1648, I think it is. I might have those dates a little bit wrong, but it's around that era. Now, he said here, yea, Christ is thus described, save that instead of ho'osomenos, which is to come before used, here it is ho'osomenos, who shalt be, and then it has in a bracket, as Beza hath brought to light out of an ancient manuscript, though it is commonly read ho'ozios and holy. So it says here, see Beza's annotations on this place. So I've found several other people who have said this as well, that Beza got this out of an ancient manuscript. So there's really no reason to doubt that Beza had this reading in an ancient manuscript. The only reason that people would doubt this is because they just simply don't want this to exist. Now, I previously in 2013 thought that Beza had a manuscript with this reading. When I was looking at James White's material and other material, I thought, well, maybe he doesn't have a manuscript. Maybe I've read the annotations wrong. And so I started to look into the whole concept of the Jehovah issue. And now for probably about 150 to nearly 200 years, this concept of Jehovah being in Revelation 16:5 has not been highlighted by scholars, because most of the scholars are going with the critical text. And so they're obviously not seeing the name of Jehovah there. So you might get a few people just sort of putting in Revelation 16:5 in references to Revelation 1:4, Revelation 1:8, Revelation 4:8, and 11:17. But they are not seeing it the same way the Reformers saw it with the Textus Receptus, because you have a Revelation 11:17, it has art to come in the Textus Receptus, but it's deleted in the other editions. Now, I know people will say, "Oh, deleted. That's poisoning the well sort of thing," but it is deleted from the Textus Receptus. The Textus Receptus was the first printed, and so that's the one that I'm going back to. And so, having that omitted, when I read through Metzger, he prefers to omit that because of his own eschatology, because people believe that Revelation 11 is talking about the millennium, where if you have is to come, that changes eschatology. See, in my eschatology, I'm pre-tribulational. I believe in a pre-trib rapture. To me, Revelation 11 is not the millennium period. Revelation 11 is just before the Antichrist comes on the scene, 3.5 years into the what's labeled the tribulation period. And so I can understand people squeezing things in to fit their eschatology, but is to come is part of all the Reformation Bibles. And so when you go through the Geneva Bible, these other Bibles, they have these readings in there. What it's saying here is Beza did have an ancient manuscript with this. Now, Beza also had access to a lot of other documents, and in the 1598 text of, in the 1549 Ethiopic, it has the future reading shall be. In Haemo Halberstadensis in the 9th century in Latin, he has that in his commentary, the shall be reading. In the 8th century, Beatus of Libana in Latin, he has that reading. And so while there might be certain variations of that, whether sometimes it might have the past, the present, and future, some like in some of the Reformation literature that Beza had access to, these other ones might only just have the past and the future, but it does have the future reading there. And so as far as I can tell, the Ethiopic has the future reading there of shall be. Now, I know this has been contested. Jan Kranz has weighed in on this and contested this. But Jan Kranz, basically the contra story is that Beza had a bit of a Joe Biden sort of moment. He tricked himself into thinking that he had a manuscript, but he really didn't have a manuscript. Where other scholars of that era, they just simply said he had a manuscript. That was the reading. So I can't understand why we would doubt that. These anecdotes about Erasmus, rushing to print and, promising to put the Communihennium in and all this sort of stuff, sometimes it gets tiring to go through those and sort of look at the other side and say, well, why don't you give the guy the benefit of the doubt here? Does he do this type of clumsy scholarship anywhere else? And so when we look at Beza, we can see he's a world-class scholar. He's well-respected. The King James translators all respected this guy. And he's come up with this reading saying it's from an ancient manuscript. This guy, Perez, in 1611 says it's Beza got it from an ancient manuscript. So that was the consensus. Other people have said that as well. So I just can't understand why that would be evidence that's rejected, just because we don't have it in our hands today. Even Dan Wallace said in World War II, we lost up to 1 million biblical documents because of the World War. Now, if you count World War I, you go back in time, even around the era of Erasmus. Erasmus had access to readings in Rome that we no longer have because of the sack of Rome in 1527, when Rome was basically set on fire. There was thousands of documents that just got stolen, burnt. People were burning things for fuel, and then we also have the disillusionment of the monasteries in England with Henry VIII, with thousands of documents going missing and being stolen as well during that time. So that was in 1540. So Erasmus had access to documents that we no longer have access to. And this is also the case for Stephanus, also the case for Erasmus. That's why we don't know what the Complutensian polyglot guys used, because we can sort of point to a few that add up to their readings, but we are leaking out manuscripts. As time goes by, the manuscripts are dropping off. Now, we might find them in a sense where, we haven't seen all these ones in Mount Athos, but the vast majority of Byzantine texts are very cohesive. So we're sort of finding stuff that's very similar. But the thing is, it comes back to nomina sacra. Is this a holy name? Is this the holiest name of God in the whole Bible? The name of Jehovah. And so the three I ams add up to the name of Jehovah. And this is the exact reading. So to have, even in Revelation 11:17, to have only the past and present, the name of Jehovah cries out and says, hey, where's the end of my name here? Because it's a full name. Now, having it omitted, you would see that why scribes would do that. You would see why scribes would put holy. I think my answer, my case explains the rise of the other readings. It explains the rise of why it has holy there. And sometimes it might have pious or agios, but it's rare, but it does have holy there because it's a holy name. It's a name, nomina, and it's sacred, it's sacra. Now, for the past 150, 200 years, scholars haven't been seeing this as a sacred name because it's only got the past and the present, and it doesn't have the future form. So they're like, well, it's not really the name of Jehovah. So instead of thinking, no, it's the name of Jehovah and it's been altered in a certain way, they're reading into all this other stuff. Now, I can understand Turretin. He's going through looking at the Kudus. He's looking at the holy, holy, holy in Isaiah, and he's trying to match these things up. I mean, Kudus is a very powerful study to do. I've been following TurretinFan with his videos on this. My mother-in-law in Pakistan, whenever she prays, she says Kudus, Kudus, Kudus in her language. So it's even leaked out into all the Arabic languages, Urdu. It's a very powerful term. But how would you indicate to someone that this is the name of Jehovah when it's such a long name? I think by putting the word holy there, which is the Kudus, that is a strong indication that, hey, there's something different here. This is a name. And so the explanations of James White were previously that Esomenos and Ozios had very similar lettering, so you could sort of swap them around or delete a letter here and there, and that's how Theodore Beza came up with his conclusion. But I think that's been removed, that type of concept. But the understanding that this is a nomina sacra, I think it's a very powerful thing that people need to look at. And also the external evidence is Beza had access to an ancient manuscript. He didn't say it was just some random manuscript. He said it was a ancient manuscript, and he said it was a good and faithful one. And so to me, that's quite huge evidence. It's just because we don't have stuff in our hands today extant doesn't mean that something didn't exist. We have to look at what these guys said. There's a lot that they had access to that we no longer have. Things get lost in time. Even like Erasmus, he had a lot of people believe that his document of Revelation has been found by Franz Delitzsch in like 1850. But if people believe that, a lot of critical text guys believe that, a lot of even TR people believe that, but that proves that manuscripts can go missing. Now, I don't believe that's the actual manuscript Erasmus had. I think they've just labeled it as that. But manuscripts go missing for hundreds of years, and sometimes they're refound, sometimes they're not. And the whole concept of having Esomenos there is backed up by Beza, saying it was found in a good, faithful, reliable manuscript. We have the Ethiopic with that reading in it. We have Hamo Haberstadensis in the 9th century. We have 8th century Beatus of Libana talking about this. But to me, the strongest evidence is it's a name. It's the name of Jehovah, the past, present, and future. And I don't think that we can get around that. Like having half a name, or, you know, having three aspects, the past, present, and future, and then just chopping the future aspect off that. To me, it's not making any sense. And why would you have the name of Jehovah also having, you know, the who was and is to come, which is an event, which to me, this is a very strong indicator that Jesus is Jehovah, because it's the one who was and is to come. And who's coming? Well, Christ is coming. So this is very powerful. This speaks to me and says, this cries out and says, Jesus is Jehovah. So what I'm presenting here and what the King James is backing up, what the Textus Receptus has, is sound. It's logical. It explains the rise of the reading of holy. It is backed up by manuscript evidence. It's not a conjectural emendation. So for Jan Krans to say this is a conjectural emendation, he's simply going against this evidence. He's making up stories to counteract Beza. And so, there's strong external evidence. There's strong external evidence that that this is the reading from an old ancient manuscript. But the internal evidence of Jehovah, it's very powerful. And the three I ams, because a lot of people don't understand the etymology of the name of Jehovah, because most people are saying Yahweh. And so, I've been in churches where they've had songs, Yahweh, Yahweh, and all this. But knowing that Yahweh comes from Yahweh Pitta or Jupiter, that's the exact way that they said Jupiter. Gesenius, he popularized this idea in his Hebrew grammar. And this type of concept, what it's done, people don't really know. There's so much baggage on the name of God now. Instead of just going, it's Jehovah, it's made up of the three I ams. There's the three exact I ams in Revelation 16:5. In the Reformation period and in the time of Beza, 1611, they saw that, where it's been blurred. There's a lot of dust in the air, and people aren't seeing that because of all this extra baggage. But so I think I'm done there.
All right. So you have forfeited 15 seconds. That's very generous. Very generous. All right. So we are currently in the middle of the rebuttal period. So TurretinFan, you are going to have 15 minutes to give your rebuttal to Nick's opening statement.
Thanks very much. I'll do my best to provide a complete rebuttal. First of all, the question of internal evidence. Does Hosios explain esomenos or vice versa? Which of these explains the other? Of course, Hosios explains esomenos because we actually have the record of Beza making the substitution. But let's look more generally. One is not a common word, and the other an obscure word. After all, although esomenos is a rare form of a common verb to be, Hosios is also a relatively rare word. It's hard to picture a situation in which the two words look or sound similar enough to be an error of sight or an error of hearing. God's continued existence is not, in itself, anything controversial. On the other hand, God as Hosios is at least a little puzzling. The term was rarely applied to the gods by the Greeks, partly because Greek deities did not usually owe reciprocal obligations to humans. So if there was an old manuscript with a reading that changed Hosios to something else, like esomenos, we could imagine that such a change is just based on misunderstanding the meaning of the word Hosios, since it's a relatively rare word, and since on pagan Greek usage, it doesn't seem to be the right word. Additionally, as implied by Beza's annotations, it's normal to have a participle serving as substantive with an article, but it's not usual in Greek to have an article with an adjective. This explains why some of the manuscripts drop the article. It's also not immediately perfectly clear what the relationship of Hosios is to the rest of the sentence, which explains the insertion of kai and in many of the manuscripts. The question then could be, why not the noun form corresponding to Hosios? And the most obvious answer to that question is that the noun corresponds is feminine, not masculine. Ultimately, it's much easier to explain how kai esomenos could arise from Hosios than the opposite. It's almost impossible to explain how a scribe could accidentally, or as a miscorrection, replace esomenos with Hosios. What about nomina sacra? There is a unique style of abbreviation that some people think arose from piety in the early church. This style of abbreviation was a specific type of contraction, and Nick illustrated this for you, typically reducing a longer word to 2 or 3 letters with a line superscribed, similar in appearance to Greek numerals. This practice of abbreviation through contraction is well documented to have started with a few words, perhaps 4. Nick actually put them in his presentation, and over time expanded to more words, typically 15 words in the patristic period. Although Nick has speculated that the word Hosios could serve as in an analogous function, there is no documentation of this alleged understanding. None of the commentators throughout the patristic or medieval period ever suggest this understanding, again, as far as I have ever been able to find. All of the versions handle the word according to its literal meaning. The Hebrew practice of substituting another word for the tetragrammaton does not provide support for Nick's speculation either. First, the word esomenos is not the tetragrammaton. While Aquila and Theodotion may have used a Greek future tense verb in Exodus 3:14, the Septuagint did not. Moreover, neither did the Septuagint, nor Aquila, nor Theodotion substitute Hosios for the tetragrammaton. The usual substitutes for the tetragrammaton were Adonai or Hashem, the name. The closest substitute that Nick has been able to identify is Hakadosh, the Holy One. For example, sometimes instead of using the tetragrammaton in spoken Hebrew, someone might say Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and I'm probably mispronouncing it, but it means the Holy One, blessed is He, or Kadosh Israel, the Holy One of Israel. But the Kadosh, while it is a powerful word, as Nick says, is the Greek equivalent for kadosh is hagios, not hosios. And we can tell this by looking at the Septuagint. We can tell this by looking at the New Testament quotations that use hosios. The fact that in those cases where it uses hosios and it's quoting from the Old Testament, it's quoting from chesed, not kadosh. On top of this, these substitutions are themselves names of God and translated literally in the King James. So ultimately, there is simply no support for Nick's theory. I get the sense that this theory was simply invented either by Nick or by the author of the King James Version today or some other person in this century. And of course, that was not ever Beza's position, nor is it why Beza made the change he made. What about the supposed evidence before? Beatus of Libana was mentioned. The Beatus commentary and the reconstructed prior commentary of Tychonius, which is assumed to have served as the basis for Beatus commentary here, have an old Latin translation that includes a future tense verb. However, qui fuisti et futurus es is a paraphastic translation of hoon kai hoen. In other words, although a future tense verb is used, it's being used to translate the present participle and imperfect indicative in the Greek. And we can see that this understanding is correct from the fact that there's only two forms of the Latin equivalent of the verb to be in beatus/Tychonius, just as in the Greek text. And more importantly, beatus and Tychonius have the Latin equivalent of holy, either pius or sanctus. I think pius is a better translation in Latin, but the majority of Latin translators seem to go with sanctus instead. They're not based on a text that had Beza substitution. What about Haimo? Haimo doesn't have the reading at all. His text says just the past tense. You are just who were holy. And then his commentary tries to argue that this past tense means 3 times, past, present, and future. But his text does not say that. The text of scriptures there doesn't say it. Now, he interprets the past tense as meaning past, present, and future, but that's not the same thing as saying that the text has that reading. What about the Ethiopic? Again, the Ethiopic has the equivalent of Hosios there in the text. And yes, it's true that the Beatus, the Tychonius Latin translation of the Greek, that Ethiopic has a similar paraphrastic translation. In other words, it doesn't exactly match. There's not a present participle and an imperfect indicative. Of course, the English doesn't do that either. And that's the reason why the English doesn't do it, and the reason why all these other languages aren't doing it, is because it's impossible to just translate exactly from the Greek to the target language when it comes to this thing. And the reason for that also is because Ethiopic's use of to be is different from both from English and from Greek. But what we can do is we can look through how the Ethiopic translated the corresponding Greek phrase in the 4 previous places, and it turns out it always uses the same future in all those places. So it's not that that there's a different translation here in Revelation 16:5, and that they have something corresponding to Beza's substitution. Instead, it's just that the Ethiopic, when they go from these two forms of the verb to be, there's still 2 forms of the verb to be in Revelation 16:5 in Ethiopic, and there's a word that corresponds to Hosios there in the Ethiopic as well. And if you were to try to get to the literal translation, the actual word that are used in Ethiopic is not a future participle, but it shouldn't really matter because it's plainly just a representation of the underlying Greek that everyone else is using, which is hoon kai hoen. Now, what about Nick's points from his opening statement? He mentions the comparison between the King James Version and the NASB. No comments on that. Union to onion. This is the opposite case. There's no reason to get rid of Hosios here. It fits perfectly in context. I've already demonstrated from Revelation 15. It's not like onion popping out in a constitution. And what about the name of God being the Tetragrammaton? Well, I agree that it is. That's the name of a sacred name of God. I'm not going to debate. I'm not interested to debate the correct pronunciation or whether there's any connection to Jupiter. What about Hutter's Hebrew New Testament? Well, there shouldn't be any particular weight given to Hutter's choices of how to translate the New Testament from Greek into Hebrew, especially after Beza, but just leave that to the side. As far as Adam Clark's comment about past, present, and future, I'll just point out, is to come is not future. The future is esomenos, but erchomenos is what's found in Revelation 1:4 and 1:8 and 4:8. Erchomenos, not esomenos. And the question should be, if you're saying that that's what John meant, then the question is, why didn't John say that? Why say erchomenos if he means esomenos? Why would he do it? What's the reason? There's no obvious explanation on Nick's position, but on the opposing position, the reason is because he's talking about the coming of Christ, coming in judgment, God's coming in judgment. Not uniquely Christ as though Christ is on his own, but God's judgment that's coming. He's the coming one because he's coming in judgment. And that judgment comes. Nick questions whether he's come already in 1117. It's not really vital to this debate whether that's the case or not, but the understanding that he has come in judgment, because the reign is already starting there, and it's mentioned that he's come there, it seems like enough of a reason. But anyway, even Beza himself acknowledged that he's come by Revelation 16, and that's why it's not there. So there's a perfect explanation of why he's no longer called the coming one there. This idea of the three I ams, or that the word is derived in some way from these three I ams, it's a nice memory aid. But remember, the King James doesn't translate it as I am, I have been, and I will be. It translates it as I am, I am, I am. When Jesus makes references back, it's as I am. And yes, there is the one who has been that John uses as a title, but none of the apostles, nor Jesus himself, refers to himself as the shall being one, ho esomenos. That's never used as a title of Jesus, not in the New Testament and not in the Septuagint of the Old Testament. James Durham has a similar, breaking down the word Jehovah into these different parts. It's a nice memory aid. And it's not even, the fact that God he's eternal. God is eternal. He's not just, he existed in the past and he's going to exist in the future. God is eternal. So even just the being one captures that already. Strong's Concordance listing erkomenos with hoon kai hoen as a single name and as an entry is interesting, but it doesn't decide whether this is part of what John wrote in Revelation 16:5. We both agree he didn't write erkomenos there. The chiastic structure works if you ignore the ho erkomenos. If you leave that out, then it's on n, and on, and then back to on n, and that gives you the proper chiastic structure by not falsely incorporating ho erkomenos into the structure. And if you put it in, it breaks it, because it's now the fifth one doesn't align with the first one. It's different from the first one. The Almana Sacra we talked about, and what about whether this is God's name, or it makes sense to people about whether or not God's name would include a future part to it. But the point is, everywhere else in the New Testament, it doesn't include a future part to it. Even in calling him the coming one, that's not a future part of the name. Even Nick seems to recognize this when he says that it's talking about a future action, a future event that's going to occur. It's not saying that the person himself is the esomenos. The trisagion, holy, holy, holy. In Isaiah, it says, holy, holy, holy is the tetragrammaton of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. But and so there's no reason to assume that something from Isaiah 6 should be added in. The text of Revelation 4:8 already says, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, in the King James Version. And the problem is that Lord God Almighty there stands for the tetragrammaton, which is, which was, and which is to come, does not stand for the tetragrammaton by parallel comparison to the Isaiah 6 text. David Perez and others have talked about the fact that Beza says that he did this on the basis of an old manuscript. And Nick suggests that we should treat this testimony as very strong, and that we have no reason to doubt that Beza actually had a manuscript. But I'll point out, and the only reason is because people don't want to believe it. Well, Edward F. Hills in King James Defended calls it a conjecture without wanting to just believe that it's a conjecture. But even if there weren't people like Hills who said that, the reason is that since the 1700s, people have been pointing out that no one has seen this manuscript. There are not any manuscripts or versions with this text. And we have Beza's original handwritten note, which mentions the change, but doesn't mention any manuscript. And as far as the loss of manuscripts, as I said, this goes back to the 1700s. So World War II is not the issue. And I'll wrap it up there.
All right. Perfect. Right on time, TurretinFan. Thank you so much for that rebuttal. We are moving into the next phase now. So we are going to have a 15-minute cross-examination. Nick will cross-examine TurretinFan, and then we will shift that over, and TurretinFan will then have the opportunity to provide a 15-minute cross-examination to Nick. Once that is over, we will take a 5-minute break and then move into a second round of cross-examination. So Nick, as soon as you start talking, I will begin the timer, and you have 15 minutes.
You muted it to me.
There we go. Thanks, Dwayne. So, TurretinFan, is the triad of Ho'on, Kaho'en, Kaho'ekomenos, is it a name?
No, it's three different titles of God.
Okay, so the whole thing is not. You're saying the whole thing is not a name.
No, it is not a name.
So you're saying that it contains three names.
Those are three titles of God: the being one, Ho'on, the one who has been, which is how 1 John starts, if I remember right, and the coming one. Those are three titles of God.
Okay, so when scholars in the Reformation, Beza, and other people talk about the name of Jehovah being built by the three I Ams, and this is to do with the one who is and was and is to come, are you in disagreement with this?
Sure.
Okay. Well, that's kind of surprising, because I guess that makes us, where part of our main debate is actually debating about the name of Jehovah specifically. So you don't think that the etymology of Jehovah is the three I Ams?
I think the etymology of Jehovah is explained by Exodus 3:14. That whether it's a third person form of the same verb as is translated I am in Exodus 3:14, or something akin to that, I think that's the best explanation. The best explanation is Exodus 3:14 itself, which he calls himself I am, and then after that he's referred to as Yod-He Vav-He.
Okay. And so just hypothetically, if you had, just say it was the name of God, just say that whole thing was a very long name of God, how would you turn that into a nomina sacra if you were a scribe in the 1st or 2nd, 3rd century? How would you turn a huge, big thing into a nomina sacra?
That all of the nomina sacra that we know of are just one word, nomina sacra abbreviations. So it's usually the first and last letter, or first letter and last couple letters, or 3 letters, or something like that. That's the way that it's done. So it's not in the trying to take a whole phrase and convert it to an abbreviated form is not something that we have any documentation of how they would do it, whether they would do it. No one talks about it.
And so I guess for the last 150, 200 years, with people focusing on the critical text and thinking that there's only 2 parts to Revelation 16:5, they most likely would not have seen that as a holy name and documented that. But beforehand, a lot of people were talking about this in the Reformation, the 3 I Ams, and many people in Revelation 1:4 state that the name of Jehovah, if you were to have the purest etymology, it would be the past, the present, and esomenos. They say that, like even Theodore Beza alludes to that in his annotations. And so I guess my question would be, I guess in a way I am a little bit shocked that you have not subscribed to Jehovah. I'm trying not to filibuster. I'm actually trying, because a lot of my questions were around that.
Okay.
Maybe I can go to Beza's. Why would you assume that Beza was mistaken about his manuscript that he said that he had?
Well, the reasons are, first of all, in his original notes, which we have, he doesn't mention any manuscript. Secondly, no one else has ever documented seeing such a manuscript. and then none of the commentaries or versions reflect the same reading as he proposes, which is replacing the word hasios with asomenos.
Okay, so do you believe that Theodore Beza was being deceptive here, or that he had a senior moment type of thing? He just maybe had got old and had dementia or whatever, and what would you say is the answer to that?
Whether Theodore Beza eventually had some kind of dementia is a different question, but in terms of when he made this, when he made the original mark, Jan Kranz, who's something of an expert on Theodore Beza's conjectures, thinks it may not have even been intended in that original mark as anything more than a commentary or suggestion or memory aid to, let's think about asomenos here. But when he went back to review his hand-marked annotations, which he made not just on that one chapter or something like that, but that at a later date when he went back to it, he may have assumed that it was part of his review of Henry Stephanus' collations or some other manuscript collations, and that it was based on that he had seen a manuscript with that, and therefore that the mark should be interpreted as coming from some manuscript. And that's that when he made his annotations, either he or one of the people assisting him in the annotations may have interpreted it that way and therefore put it down that it was from an old, reliable manuscript, even though, in fact, it seems that it was not from an old, reliable manuscript.
Okay, and Jan Kranz actually rejects the whole concept of it coming from the collations on his website of Conjectures.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just so you're in agreement with Jan Kranz that Beza sort of tricked himself. He wrote something down and then years later went, I've written something down here. I'm going to just say it's from an old reliable manuscript.
I think people can make mistakes. I think it's quite possible for him to see that he made a note and assume that he probably made it based on, he remembers that he was looking at manuscripts because he has a note at Revelation 1, and Jan Kranz point that out as well. In chapter 1 of Revelation, he mentions something coming from a manuscript. He doesn't bother to say which manuscript, but from a manuscript there. And so he may have thought that this note was similarly from a manuscript, and that he just didn't jot down that it's from a manuscript originally. I think it would be an easy mistake to make, and I don't think it requires any kind of superhuman error, just a normal human error.
Okay, so it seems like there's a lot of humans doing errors here with Revelation 16:5. With Hoskia, you're saying that the Ethiopic, it's not really saying the future reading. Is that what you're saying? It doesn't say the future reading of shall be?
If you were to translate literally from Ethiopic to English, trying to maintain the tenses of the verbs in Ethiopic into the equivalent tense in English, then you would have a future tense there, but you'd also have future tenses in 1:4, 1:8, 4:8, 11, and so forth. Well, I don't know about all. There's one or two where it doesn't have both forms of to be, but in those in the places that have two forms of to be, they use this imperfect and future together consistently, always translating the same Greek words in this way. So it's not a question of whether they have in their own language a future. The question is what the Greek from which they're translating was, and based on how they translated this phrase in other places, the natural natural interpretation is that here also they had the same Greek example as they had in the previous places.
Okay, because Hoskia says that it's saying the future form here, and he puts that in the Latin, which comes from Walton's polyglot. But you're saying if you go to the Greek behind that, it doesn't have the future form there. And so, but isn't that actually sort of like circular reasoning? You're putting your text there and saying, well, if it came from my text, it shouldn't have that.
No, it's not a circular reasoning. It's you have to appreciate the fact that it's difficult to find a corresponding Ethiopic or Ge'ez word. I don't know the right pronunciation of the word, G-E apostrophe E-Z, it's hard to find an exact corresponding word because the use of the verb to be in Ethiopic is different from that in Greek. And so my understanding is, based on looking at the translation at 1.4, the translation at 1.8, 4.8, and 11.17, that the Ethiopic translator is trying to provide the equivalent meaning, not the equivalent words, and that therefore in those other places he uses the same words as in 16.5. There's some small differences because he has to incorporate the UR that's found in 16.5, and he has the them, which is also found in 16.5, which isn't in the other places. But essentially, it's the same tenses of verbs in each of those places. So the natural assumption is, if that's how he's translating from the Greek in 1.4 and 1.8, then that same pair of participles is probably what he saw in his Greek copy from which he made his Ethiopic translation. But it's one of the limitations of trying to work from a translation in the first place.
Okay, and so Hoskia also says that Beatus of Libana and Hamo halberstadensis, I know it might be pseudo Hamo, but they also have the future form there. So it seems like Hoskia has mentioned these three future forms. To me, Hoskia was a very good scholar. I disagree with some of these methodologies and things like that, just like I might with Dean Bergon or whatever. But he was very good, and he's mentioning that there's a future form here, but you seem to deny that. So you're denying Beza had a manuscript. You're denying that there's the name of Jehovah there with the three I ams. You're denying the Ethiopic has a future reading. You're denying Beatus of Libana, Hamo halberstadensis has a future form there. And so do you disagree with Hoskia's book on Revelation 16:5 concerning the text of the Apocalypse?
So I don't recall him being the one who says that Hamo has such a reading in his text. If he did, he'd be wrong. That's not what it says. I think that's from the KJV Today author who made that assertion. And I do think he's wrong. He's mistranslated the text. As far as whether there's a future form of the verb to be in the commentary, of course there is. I read that in my speech. So Hamos has the future form in his commentary, saying that the past tense in the text stands for or means the past, present, and future. That's his interpretation of it. So there is a future form of the verb to be there. But in his text, both in Hamos' case and in Beatus' case, there is the equivalent of hosios there. So it's not that there's not a future tensed verb in the text, it's that there's no substitution of a future tensed verb for the equivalent of hosios. So for example, I think it's sanctus in Beatus, but in all the Old Latin, it's either sanctus or pius. So, yeah.
And so, I would understand it if it had, the future form and holy after that, to indicate it's still a holy name and things. How would you explain the Arabic Bible with Eternae there, which is exactly how they have it in Exodus 3:14? They don't have the three I ams there. The verse is very short in Walton's Polyglot, and it just says his name is eternal. That's the name of God, and that's exactly what they have in Revelation 16:5 as well. So how would you explain that reading in Revelation 16:5 of just eternal in Arabic?
Well, I mean, of course, important for our discussion is that they do have Arabic, although it doesn't directly translate a form of the verb to be there, that it instead uses this dynamic equivalent of eternal in at least one of the Arabic translations. This translation of eternal doesn't conflict with my thesis, because as I was suggesting, sometimes translating the verb to be is challenging, and it's not surprising that someone's going to give a dynamic equivalent instead of giving the exact word. We don't do it in English, and I'm not surprised they don't do it in Arabic. But the Arabic does have the equivalent of hosios there, even when it has eternal. So the Greek that the Arabic translator was looking at also had hosios in it, and didn't have isomonos replaced by or didn't have Hosios replaced by Esomenos.
And so, I'm just trying to clarify something. Were you saying that erkomenos is not a future form?
Correct. It's a present tense.
Okay.
Present participle.
So when it's saying is to come, like to me that screams out that it's a future event. In a sense of the context of Scripture, you got the past, the present, and a future, the one who was and is to come. Yep, I understand in the Greek grammar, but the subject of what it's speaking about is still to come. It is a future type of form. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. The participle.
Okay, so time is up. So we can do this. If both parties are okay, we can finish the question.
Yep.
Okay. So the erkomenos with an article is the one who is coming, the coming one, and so it's coming present tense as opposed to the person, the shall be coming one. In other words, it's not that the person will be coming in at some future time, but he as distinct from now. Although that would be a bit odd to think of, like, well, I'm not coming now, but I will be coming. Even so, you could still talk about someone now as coming at some future point. But of course, the terminus of coming is arriving. And of course, yes, that will occur at a future time. And therefore, and I think I mentioned somewhere, sometimes is to come is a paraphrastic reference to the future. In other words, you say the best is yet to come. And that just means the best will be. So, yeah, I mean, it can have that a paraphrastic sense in which it refers to the future.
All right, perfect. Okay, so we are now going to turn the tables. Nick, you are in the hot seat, and TurretinFan, you have 15 minutes to question him to your heart's content.
Thank you very much. So let's start with that same question about erkomenos. Why erkomenos and not esomenos in all the other places?
I think because the book of Revelation is a book of eschatology, and it is pointing to Jehovah and Christ, because Christ is Jehovah coming. So it involves the name of God, but it's also talking about an aspect of God that is part of the narrative. So to me, the past, the present, and I would say to come is that it involves the future, but it's not specifically exactly the name of God with the shalt be reading, the esomenos reading, but the erkomenos is like an event. And so I would say that it's representing the name of Jehovah, as many people say it is in their commentary in Revelation 1:4, but it's also in tune with the narrative that's happening. Just like with Jesus, he says sometimes, I am the bread of life. I am the. So we understand that he's talking about he is the I am, and we read that there. But those are usually not capitalized. They're just I am the bread of life, and we can read them both ways. So I think John was putting that both ways. Yeah.
Are you aware of anyone before the New Testament, of anyone who used esomenos to refer to God, whether they're Philo or Josephus or any of the intertestamental documents or any of the Old Testament translations?
I only know of pagans who did that, and I think they stole that from the Hebrews, from the name of God.
Okay. When you mentioned the idea of nomina sacra, you mentioned that there were 4 original nomina sacra: Lord God, Jesus Christ. When did this form of nomina sacra you've described this use as nomina sacra? When did it arise? What century?
I can't tell, because we've only got 4 manuscripts of the book of Revelation with Revelation 16:5 in it. So Revelation 16:5, there's 4 manuscripts before the 10th century. So it's very hard to go back and get anything, clarify anything really in the Greek there. We have the Latin, Hymo, and others, but going back to, I wouldn't know if it's 1st century, 2nd century, or if it's a latter thing, but earlier manuscripts could have had Esomenos, but we just simply don't have that or know that.
Okay. Do you have anyone before the year 2000 who said that this is an example of an abbreviation nomina sacra by any other name, that's what this was?
I think anyone explaining the name of Jehovah actually inadvertently quoted Revelation 16:5 without really knowing it, because they were saying the past, the present, the future, ha'on, ka-hen, ka-esomenos, and even when they were talking in Revelation 1:4, they might say that, but they mightn't even have that reading in their text. So for the last 200 years, sorry.
I apologize. I meant to ask something slightly different, which is in terms of saying that the use of Hosios as an indication of a sacred name, that idea. Who mentions that idea that it's a substitute for a sacred name or an abbreviation or whatever the right word is?
That it's an abbreviation, to me, that's like elementary. Like when you see the union comment that Dan Wallace made, and it was changed to onion, you can tell that it should be union. When you see holy there on the holiest name in the whole New Testament, to like the 3 I ams, etc., to me that just makes perfect sense of why there is a substitution there of holy.
Did anyone before you say this?
Well, Theodore Beza, in his annotations at Revelation 1:4, he talks about the one who was and is to come as being part of the etymology of Jehovah, these 3 aspects of the past, the present, and future. And then he says the purest form of that is esomenos, which a lot of people are in agreement with, even critical text people, with that type of thing of esomenos being, the 3rd aspect of the name of Jehovah and the I ams. But so he basically says it's the holiest name of God in the whole Bible, Jehovah, and the understanding that holy is written there in Revelation 16:5 to me just makes perfect sense, that it is a nomina sacra.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is when I look at the New Testament Conjectures website that Jan Kranz has, and I can go and I can find the first person in history to question Theodore Beza, and it's not right away. There's some time elapses before anyone starts to question whether or not Theodore Beza's take is right. Now, indirectly, Hodder does, maybe, but in terms of people actually saying, I'm not so sure that Theodore Beza had such a manuscript, that's in the 1700s when somebody finally gets around to saying that. My question is, when it comes to who actually said that this word Hosios is a substitute for something else, as a deliberate substitution, like you're suggesting that it's a scribes intentionally put it there in order to replace. Who's the one who said that? I think was it originally you, or should we be giving credit to someone before you?
Well, I got that concept from reading Revelation 1:4 annotations of Beza, which, I mean, if we had time, I could read through it, but it's like, I think if anyone was to read through that, they would go, the name of Jehovah is there at these triadic declarations, which is a holy name. And so, but I understand you're speaking about the exact substitution of holy at Revelation 16:5, but to me, it just makes perfect sense. It's the holiest name. The ones they were putting nomina sacra on were Kurios. They are those 4. This is actually more holy because it's got the I ams there. And like Jay Green in his interlinear, he's like, Jehovah is from the I ams. It's just quite a common thing, but I think it's been forgotten in the last 150 years because of textual criticism. People aren't seeing this, where But the whole substitution of holy there, to me, this is just a logical conclusion that it's the holiest name of God, and what do you put on that? You put holy.
Okay, and when it comes to the question of the this being the most holy name, as you said, you're saying it's the most holy name because it refers to the Tetragrammaton name. But in all of the manuscripts of the Old Testament that are in Greek, does anyone ever that you're aware of use Hosios in place of that Tetragrammaton?
I'm not sure. My understanding is that the Septuagint is is not a BC document; it's an AD document. I think the earliest Septuagint manuscripts have been corrupted. What we have today is Origen's fifth column of Origen's hexapla, and I think perhaps they had that, but we just don't know. I don't think we have the accurate one that people talk about that was equivalent to the Hebrew. We have something that's very different to the Hebrew now, and so.
But of the ones we have, whether it's corrupt or not corrupt, but all the ones we have, none of them use Hosios as a substitute. They all use Kyrios, or in some cases they actually use like pi instead, and so or some Greek letters or something like that. But none of them use Hosios, right?
There are many different types of substitutions. Sometimes in those manuscripts they would even put the Hebrew because they thought it was so sacred. Sometimes they on Wikipedia of all places, it says that at times the Tetragrammaton was substituted with the word holy. I've been looking for that. I put that in my book because it was just there, But so I guess I'm studying more and more into this, and there's so many avenues you can go down, but I don't have that information right in front of me. I'm not sure if I have had it at one stage and just forgotten it.
Suppose that Beza didn't make a mistake and did have access in some way to an old reliable manuscript that had the word esomenos in it. Then what if it also had the word Hosios next to that word esomenos? Would that, and we find it, let's say we find it and it has Beza's name and it says, this is my famous manuscript, somehow we know for sure that it is. I know there's always could be doubts about things, but suppose we're sure that it is his manuscript somehow we're sure, and it has both words. Will that change your view? Would you have a different outcome to this analysis in that case?
I think with the word holy there in the manuscripts, I actually don't have a problem with that reading. Because to me, when you understand nomina sacra, it's like seeing the name of Jesus contracted. And so having holy there, it's like, okay, that's a secondary reading. But expanding that nomina sacra, you have the full name of Jehovah there. And so to me, like if I read Stephanus's 1546 edition of the Textus Receptus, he has nomina sacra through that. But then in his later editions, he has the name Jesus and Lord expanded. And so I don't go, well, that's a bad text. I just say, well, it's not expanded yet.
Here's my question. If the purpose of putting a word there to indicate that this is a holy name of God, wouldn't the right word to use be hagios, not hosios, since hosios refers to being religiously correct or observing religious rules, and hagios refers to being set apart or being sacred?
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed you've done a lot of work into the different holies and things like that, comparing agios and kadosh. And like in Revelation 4:8, there's a lot of agioses because the holies there that are in Sinaiticus and other manuscripts where they have 9 of these holies, that's the agios. But I guess I haven't explored everything to do with nomina sacra. I've only just sort of discovered the Greek name for nomina sacra. They had a special name for it, and so I wanted to study down that avenue. But there's lots that I don't know about it, but there's lots that I do know about it. But it's like a can of worms. Once you go down a path, you end up having to know everything about that type of subject.
You quoted someone as saying that 1 million biblical documents were lost in war. Do you believe that number to reflect that there was previously 1 million biblical copies in the New Testament in Greek that are no longer available?
I wouldn't say in Greek. I would say in all languages, because that's quoting Dan Wallace from the Credo course. I think it's in his first lesson of 36 lessons that he does. I listened through all that, and he mentions that. And so to me, I usually quote that too. People who are critical text guys, because they value Dan Wallace's opinion, and that's why I quote the Onion quote as well. Not that I agree with Dan on everything, but I agree with those type of things. But I don't think he's talking about Greek. I think he's talking about Latin. I think he's talking about Armenian. I think he's talking about coins. I think he's talking about all sorts of things that have written documentation on it have gone. They've been looted. Millions of things over the last 500,000 years have just gone missing.
When people look at the apparatus that Stephanus provided in the 1550 Stephanus, there's about 15 or so, maybe it's 15 to 17 manuscripts listed with sigla, like alpha, beta, and so forth. And since then, we have people who study this have identified corresponding manuscripts for each one of those, with one or two exceptions, I think. But is there some reason to think that those ones are just exceptionally well preserved, whereas the overall manuscripts are decimated and hardly any of them are preserved?
I would say that the vast majority of manuscripts are Byzantine. The Textus Receptus is a Byzantine text. It has some things cleaned up, but it is primarily Byzantine. The majority of manuscripts do back up the Textus Receptus. And so there are some times when the majority of manuscripts don't back up the Textus Receptus, but when we have a few minority readings. But for every 20 minority readings in the critical text, we have one in the Textus Receptus. So I don't think that either of us are opposed to minority readings if they're correct. If the math works out, we should go with it.
Thanks.
All right, awesome. So that was round one of the cross-examinations. Good job, Nick and Turretin. I love that it is staying civil and good. Praise the Lord. That's good. So what we're going to do now is we are going to take a brief 5-minute break. My coffee wants to escape, and so this will be the opportunity to do so. Nick, I think you have the buttons there to press to do that. When we get back, we will... there we go. When we get back, we will have a second round of cross-examination, and that will be 10 minutes each, and then we will move into the closing statement. So whenever you're ready for that break, go ahead and hit the button, and we will be back in 5 minutes.
So this says 3 minutes, but I'll play it twice. I think we'll go 6 minutes.
All right, 6 minutes. All right. Everybody is here. I was a little nervous there, TurretinFan. I saw your camera was off. Maybe you were still getting your drink or something.
No, just, in case I decide to pick up my cell phone and drop it, who knows what. I just have to.
That's right.
Yeah.
Good. I have water this time. I'm all coffeeed out. So, all right, here we are. We are back. Nick, TurretinFan. We are moving into the final phases of the debate. So just as a reminder, we are going to be moving into a second round of cross-examinations. They will be 10 minutes each. We will begin with Nick and move to TurretinFan afterwards. Once that is done, we will move into closing statements, and then we will do live Q&A. So if you have questions, in the chat, tag me at Dwayne Green so that it comes up nice, bright, and orange, and I see your question, and then I will flag that for the Q&A. So be sure to do that. So with that being said, we are going to move into our 10-minute cross-examinations. Nick, we will begin with you, and I will start the timer as soon as you begin talking. You're on mute.
You're muted.
Okay, thanks for that, guys. So, TurretinFan, Nehemiah Gordon, he's recently just tested Vaticanus and the amulets there and things like that. Now, he is considered a very good scholar. He has pretty much the same concept that I have about the etymology of Jehovah. Why would you reject his work, and where do you get your conclusions from?
So I don't reject his work in the area where he's a scholar, which it relates to his study of the scribal habits of medieval scribes and his especially his physical science work in testing inks. That's an area where he has a lot of expertise, and that's his doctoral thesis relates to that, and he's a respected expert in that. Now, he also has some other things about how to pronounce the Tetragrammaton, on which he's very much has very much a minority view among people, among scholars. I would say among scholarship, but I don't think technically he's a scholar in that field. I think he's also a scholar, and he has a very strong opinion on that subject. But whether his opinion is right or not, and he wants to say, if I remember right, he says Yehovah or something like that as his pronunciation of the name. To me, it's neither here nor there. To me, it makes no difference whether you pronounce the name one way or another way. The pronunciation aspect of his view makes no difference as to the question of Revelation 16:5. Now, and also, I don't think that his view of how they came up with the name, I don't find his explanation compelling if he means that that's actually how Moses or how God himself came up with the name. If he just means that it's a good memory aid, I don't have a problem with it. I think it's a great memory aid and a great way of remembering that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But it doesn't mean that that's like the way that the name was somehow derived. The name is related to the Greek verb. I'm terrible, not Greek word, Hebrew word, and I'm terrible with Hebrew words to be able to tell you hava or hova. Hava, I believe, is the word. But anyway, it's related to the word hava. It's not sort of non-controversial that it's related to that word. And beyond that, trying to get more specific, I think is just that's the reason in a nutshell.
Okay, so at the first triadic declaration in Revelation 1:4, Dan Wallace said this is the worst grammatical solecism in Revelation, with the reading there in the text. Are you in agreement with Dan Wallace that this is a solecism there in Revelation 1:4 at the triadic declaration?
I don't recall the context of Dan Wallace's comments to be able to specify which solecism he had in mind. In Revelation 1:4, there's two solecisms, at least, that are arguably there. One of them relates to whether apo 2 should be added in order to to whether I think it's putting the two after apo in order to avoid a solecism if you didn't insert this two. And then the others, there are other solecisms, but the biggest one is the article with a finite verb, namely this imperfect indicative. That isn't proper Greek, but the reason for it is there's a motivating reason behind it. But yeah, it's not standard Greek. I agree with that. If that in either of those 2 points, I agree with his point that it's not standard Greek. But if he's saying that therefore the text is wrong, I mean the actual not the majority text. If the majority text here, he's saying that's wrong because of the solecism, I don't agree. I think John had a point, and I think the observation that this is being used as a title of God, and that's why it's not declined the way one would expect. I think that observation is solid.
So would you say that it's called a solecism there because the name of God has just been put into the text? So it's actually not saying, who is and was and is to come in a sense of a sentence. It's actually like a whole name being put in there.
Multiple titles. There are three titles in a row there. But yeah, I think that because those are titles, they should be translated as proper nouns, which the King James doesn't do. And they therefore should probably be capitalized because they refer to God just out of reverence, not because it's grammatically necessary. But yeah, I think that would be appropriate because those are titles of God. The being one, the one who has been, and the coming one. Those three things are titles of God, and they should be appropriately. That's one way to improve the King James Version. That's not the one I was focused on in this debate, but that's one. Yeah.
Okay, and so I guess I'm using that example just because the concept that it is a name fixes that solecism. There's no solecism there in the Textus Receptus. The concept that it is a name, it solves that problem. And so I guess in a way, sort of pushing toward you, sort of admitting that it is a name, but you admit that it is three names. But I'm sort of saying, well, this is one whole name of Jehovah. So in Revelation 1:8, it inserts the word God there. So Manetti, in his Latin text, which was based upon Greek manuscripts 70 years before Erasmus, he omitted God there, and so did Erasmus. This also has to do with the Triadic Declaration, who is and was and is to come. Do you go with the reading of God there, or do you go with the reading that doesn't have God there?
No, I don't think we should take God out of the text. I would note that Manetti, interestingly, we do have the Greek text from which Manetti translated. So his library was donated to the Vatican Library on his death. So we have the actual Greek manuscript he used, and we have a Latin manuscript that he also referred to. And based on when I looked at Revelation 16:5, I saw that there were corruptions in his Latin translation that he got from his Latin text. He didn't get those from his Greek text, and if he had followed the Greek text, he wouldn't have had those. So I haven't studied 1:8 to tell you what's the case about 1:8, but my guess would be that there's a real chance that his Greek text has Hotheos there. I don't know for a fact that that's the case, though. It's just my kind of guess based on looking at 16:5.
Okay, so with Revelation 4:8, with some of the manuscripts that are deemed, the best manuscripts, there's 9 holies there. Why would you reject those and not translate them in the critical text?
One reason would be that we look also at, well, for one thing, we look at the in general, we're trying to look at the overall texts, not just one or two texts. I know that there is a tendency sometimes to just look at the oldest 2 or the oldest 4. In this case, as you pointed out, there's 4 that are particularly early Greek texts. It might be tempting just to look at those 4 and not to look at the rest. And also, it makes sense to look at the versions that are translated from it. And when you look at the versions that are translated from it, and you look at the overall Greek texts, having only 3 holies, the Trias Agion, is the more common rendering. I don't remember the actual numbers of how many have 9, the triple holy there. There is a surprising number that do have that. I don't remember the total number though. It may be it's possible it's a majority reading, but I think it's a minority reading. I just don't have that data in front of me. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm asking questions outside of Revelation 16:5, but I'm sort of making a point here. Like with Revelation 11:17, with the ending taken off, can you see that all of these triadic declarations actually have been attacked and been, sometimes you're in agreement. We shouldn't have all those holies there. Sometimes you're saying, well, the end of Revelation 11:17 shouldn't be there, or God should be. And so can you see that I'm looking at the Textus Receptus, which to me seems mathematically perfect. But when I'm looking at the critical text, it's all over the place with all these different readings.
Well, whether the manuscripts are what they are. So, I mean, it doesn't, the fact that there are manuscripts with wrong readings is just the reality of life. We have to do the best that we can with what God's given to us when he's given to us the manuscripts to pass them down. And he's given us the work of editors, both Beza and people who are even more skilled at textual criticism than Beza was. So we don't have to throw them out, all that information out. We just, as an example, the Vulgate doesn't have 9 holies. And just as one example, undoubtedly,
that's time. I'll let you finish your answer there, TurretinFan.
Sorry, I feel like I ate up too much time with my answer. But anyway, that's the point is not to deny any perfection, just to follow what God's given us as far as we can.
All right, perfect. So that's phase 1. So now we are going to move into the 10-minute cross-examination. This time, Nick, you're in the hot seat, TurretinFan. I will begin the timer as soon as you begin speaking, even though you already have a timer.
Thanks very much. Towards the end of the previous cross-examination round, I think it was, you had said something like the Textus Receptus is an example of a Byzantine text and that the majority backs up the Textus Receptus. You would agree that that's definitely not the case in this instance that we're debating, that the majority and the Byzantine texts all agree that it should be Hosios.
Absolutely not. But I think all the majority texts in Matthew 1:1 have Eel for the name of Jesus. Every text has that. So do we just go with Eel, or do we expand it and say Jesus? And so my point of being a nomina sacra is that it's there, but it's in a nomina sacra form.
Okay. But as far as the supposed manuscript that Beza's annotations indicate he had some access to, if that's a manuscript that has the word esomenos written out, it would be the only one that we know of.
Yes, and so even though the Textus Receptus used to be labeled the majority text, that was a name for it. That Westcott and Hort had the minority text. The other Byzantine text was the majority. Because they printed a thing called the majority text in the 1980s, that's confused things. The Textus Receptus was never like, oh, we've got this many manuscripts, so we'll go with that. It wasn't about a majority, minority. It was the correct readings, the ones that had the correct Greek grammar, the one that had the strong internal evidence. So sometimes they would go with one manuscript that they had in front of them that had the correct reading and reject others.
You mentioned that Erasmus had access to documents we no longer have, and that the Complutensian editors used manuscripts that we may not know about. As far as we know, did any of those documents have esomenos?
As far as we know, no.
You mentioned the sack of Rome and the dissolution of monasteries and the fact that some manuscripts may have been lost as a result of these things. Can you identify any specific manuscript of Scripture in Greek that was lost as a result of the sack of Rome or the dissolution of monasteries?
There could have been copies of Beatus of Libana, Hamo Halberstadensis. Beatus of Libana was very popular. In my book, I mentioned there's 35 copies of that. in Latin. So that would be 35 manuscripts with that reading. Possibly those went up in flames with that reading there. But as far as Greek manuscripts, no, I can't tell you.
You mentioned Bedius of Libana a few times. Would you agree that Bedius has an equivalent word to Hosios?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And that it only has two forms of the verb to be?
As far as I can tell, when I'm looking at Hoskia has Bedius of Libanus qui fuisti et futurus es. And so he is saying that it's got the future reading. And so that's usually been the one that I'm looking for. Sometimes we would be at loggerheads about the word Lord in that verse, whether it's in or out. But but that's a different issue. So the whole thing, sometimes holy is there, sometimes it's not there. But with Bedius of Libana, I'm pretty sure it's got the future reading, but it does have holy there.
So you say the future reading because it has futurus s, correct?
Yes.
But it does, and it only has fuisti as the other form of the verb to be. There's no est there, no present tense, correct?
Yes. So it's got the past and the future.
All right. And Haimo, you mentioned Haimo's reading. What's your understanding of what the text in Haimo says?
So the text in Haimo differs from his commentary. So his commentary is basically saying it formerly had the past, the present, and the future. And so where the text doesn't say that. So I guess it's a bit like the situation where you have the writing of Jerome at 1 John at the beginning says 1 John 5:7 is being taken out by unfaithful scribes. And then in that manuscript, it's taken out. And so it's quite an interesting thing. And so, but he is saying there that it has the past, present, and the future in his commentary there.
So the translation, a translation of his commentary says, "And I heard the angel of the waters, that is, the messenger of the peoples, because we read in the following, many waters are many peoples, then saying, you are just, who were holy." The past tense is placed here for 3 times, that is, for past, present, and future. Who were holy, you are just, and will be. Are you saying that this means that he has some text which has a future tense verb in it?
Scholars who are better at Latin than me have said that. And so I'm obviously resting upon their translation and their work. But when it's saying in past times, it's used here for 3 times, that is the past, the present, and the future. To me, this commentary is talking about that aspect.
And you say scholars, are you referring to anyone other than the King James Today article author, or is there some other scholar who has that view?
There are, like, because it's quite a detailed question on one thing. All that comes to my mind at the moment is the KJV Today article. Okay. And but I know him personally. He wants to remain anonymous, like a lot of people do.
Yeah. I don't blame him.
But he's a very skilled linguist. He's a polyglot. He knows several languages, and so I would say that his translation here is very good.
But you're not able to judge whether it's a good translation or not because you don't know Latin as well as he does, right? You're just hoping that it's good.
That's why I go to experts like Georgios Babiniotis for Greek, and I go to Nehemiah Gordon for Hebrew. I don't rely on myself.
Yeah, perfect. All right. And then I want to come back to the word hosios instead of hagios, because it seems as though your main argument is that you believe that a scribe, or more than one scribe, possibly in parallel, decided to replace the word esomenos with the word Hagios. And my question is, why would he use Hagios when he could have used Hagios? Assuming that there is such a scribe and he's doing this, the word Hagios is a much more common word. It's the word that means sacred. Why not use that word? Why use Hagios? What's the reason?
I think one of the reasons, if Agios is already in the text, they could have mistaken that for just being part of the text. But having such a word like they have points more to the concept of it being a sacred name. And so like in Revelation 4:8, it has Agios, Agios, Agios. And so the holy, holy, holy. So they could have thought, well, that's just saying that type of thing. So they've put this different form of holy there to indicate that this is this is my surmising that someone in the scriptorium knew that type of holy would indicate a holy and sacred name.
In the text of Revelation, the closest word that we would translate holy in English is in Revelation 15:4, and that word, which the King James translates as holy, is Hagios, not Hagios. So if the issue is
1 minute,
the issue is confusing it with one of the text words, why wouldn't the word to be avoided be Hagios? Why, in other words, isn't it more natural that it just is being used in its normal literary sense as it was in 15:4?
I think if we take into consideration that the triadic declarations, the Agios is surrounded with the triadic declaration, so they would more so link the Agios to the past, present, and future aspect. This other reading in Revelation 15:3 doesn't have the triadic declaration there, and so I think they would be less likely to link it to that.
Okay. Let's see.
we'll give you one more question, TurretinFan.
Okay. The final question, what's up with Edward Hills and saying this is a conjecture in his King James Version defended? What's his reason, motivation?
And so I think that's where James White got his information from, that it was a conjecture. When you go through Hills, you can see exactly where James White sort of almost copied and pasted material there, especially in Luke 2:22 on my website. You can see that. So Hills was going with the information that he had at the time. And so he did, I think it was a PhD in textual criticism, I'm pretty sure. And he taught Theodore Leader. So he was an academic. And I think in those circles, the whole concept of Revelation 16:5 being a conjectural emendation, that was what Nessel said, Everhard Nessel, who did the Nestle Alan, eventually it was Alan text. And so most scholars were saying that in those days. He wrote his book originally in 1956. And it's only really been the last, since the internet sort of boomed, that it's only really been since then that people are questioning these things and finding more evidence, and other things are put online. Hoskier's work isn't just in a library somewhere. It's everyone has access to it. And so I think people are becoming more aware. And so I just think that he's just made a mistake there. And I used to think it was a conjectural emendation from James White's book. That's where I got it from. Then I started questioning it, and now I'm in this position today where I don't think it's a conjectural emendation at all.
All right. Perfect. So we are finished with our cross-examinations, and we will be moving into our closing statements. So Nick will have 5 minutes, and then TurretinFan will have the last word with 5 minutes. So Nick, once you begin speaking, I will hit the timer, and you will be able to give us your closing statement.
Okay, so thanks, Dwayne, and thanks, Turretin, for coming on and debating me. I really enjoyed debating you, and I thank you for your demeanor and also for studying this issue. It's one of those issues it's pretty rare for people to get involved with this. You get 30 people watching a whole video that goes for 5 hours, but it's an interesting topic, and so I think viewers need to know that it is a name. People like Nehemiah Gordon, I've sort of discovered Nehemiah after writing my book and after claiming that the I ams is the etymology of Jehovah. And Nehemiah has solidified that. I've had him on my program. We've talked in depth about that type of thing. It's very interesting. So I think understanding that this is a name, you wouldn't just quote half of a name. You would have the full name there. So there's three aspects: the past, the present, and the future. Even if we had Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and holy, we would question that. We would say, well, why doesn't it have the future aspect there? When we look at the triads in Scripture, we see what is it? John, Peter, and James. I can't remember the exact order, but if you go through the Gospels, it's always in a specific order. If you have it around a different way, it's like, well, why would it have it, or why would it have this other disciple or a different name there? It's always mentioning these three in a certain pattern. And so when we come to Revelation, we see these triads. We see that it forms this chiastic structure, which to me was news to me. I only discovered that a couple of years ago. Someone in the chat mentioned this, and so I studied it and thought, wow, this is amazing. The fact that it's three I ams. If you go to Tischendorf, if you go to Bible Hub and type in Revelation 1:4, 1:8, 4:8, 11:17, and 16:5, he has hot emi, which is I am in every case, even in Revelation 16:5. And so he's having I am. And so scholars are saying, this is the I am, make up the name of Jehovah. And so to me, there's just so much evidence that this is a name. And so understanding it's a name, then we understand the concept of nomina sacra. Of course, for the last 150 years, if people haven't been focused on this because of the mess that the critical text has brought onto the scene, the dust thrown in the air, the fog. People go to Revelation 1:4 and go, oh, it's a solecism there. They go to 1:8 and say, oh, God's there. Is that the Father or is that Jesus talking? They go to Revelation 4:8 and go, holy, 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 holy. It's all these holies there. They go to Revelation 11:17 and the end is chopped off there. And it's like, oh, we're in the millennium, so eschatology is involved with that. And then we go to Revelation 16:5 and it's got holy at the end of it. So all the way through, all these verses seem to have been attacked. And it's like when I'm debating against Jehovah's Witness. I'm not saying TurretinFan is like a Jehovah's Witness, but if I'm debating the Trinity and I go to 1 John 5:7, they're like, well, that's not there. I go to 1 Timothy 3:16 and say God was manifest in the flesh. They're like, no, it doesn't say that. It says who appeared in a body. And the favorite verses I go to back up my text are changed and morphed or deleted. And so that's what I find with Revelation 16:5. I'm like, look, this is the name of Jehovah. And it's like, well, look at all these other things. And they're so morphed and twisted where when you get with the Textus Receptus, it's perfect. It fits perfect. I don't think God's the author of confusion. I think he wants to reach the people who don't know as much as me and TurretinFan know. And he wants something beautiful to be there and have the past, the present, and the future. Sorry, was that 1 minute?
Yes.
Yes, sorry. So he wants the past, the present, and the future to be there in all of these cases, just like it has yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't want confusion of just having the past and the present and no future. I don't think that helps with the text. I think it just brings more questions and it brings confusion. And I think all these things were tidied up in the Textus Receptus and are reflected in the King James Version. So we should keep shall be in the text.
All right. Excellent. You had 20 seconds if you want to say anything else. All right. Okay.
Amen.
We are going to shift gears over to TurretinFan. You have 5 minutes to give us your closing statement.
All right. Well, it's been an interesting debate. I've enjoyed it. And there's no debate that I've prepared for more than this debate. And it's an honor to debate the person who's literally written the book on the subject from the other side. So my appreciation to Nick for this debate and for the manner in which it's conducted. As well, I am interested to wrap this debate up based on what we've seen during the debate. What I think it comes down to is essentially one of three options. Option one is that there's this newly attested form of what Nick calls nomina sacra, a new form of abbreviation that's unknown to history, that nobody has written about in the patristic era, that no one has written about in the medieval era. In fact, nobody wrote about it up to the 1900s, as far as we can tell, but that is inspired by Beza's comments about the fact that the being one and the one who has been relate to the name of God, the Tetragrammaton, often pronounced as Jehovah, or Yahweh is another way people pronounce the same Tetragrammaton. That those two relate to it, and then a mistaken assumption that the coming one, because it relates to the future, must also be linked in with the one who is. Ho'on is a Septuagint translation, and it's also used as a title of God in the New Testament. It's the Ho'en is used as a title of God in 1 John 1, if I remember correctly. I'm going from the top of my head. But these are titles of God. And the coming one is a title of God. It's not used in this exact form, but it relates to the fact it's calling God the one who is coming. And of course, that means coming in judgment, something we should all be aware of and ready for by having faith in Jesus Christ. Because he will come in judgment. We don't know when he's going to come for us. Even if his return is delayed for much time, our life may not be. So if you don't believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, believe today. Trust in him for salvation. But to return to the debate, that option one is that there's this new way of somehow abbreviating or obscuring or concealing some part of God's name, which is the theory one. Theory two, Beza may have had a manuscript which may have had the word esomenos there. We can't definitively prove beyond all doubt that he didn't, but the fact that nobody's ever seen such a manuscript seems to be a reason to think it. Also, his original notes don't mention a manuscript. This appears between his original notes and his final annotations, and we have no strong reason to believe that he's correctly claimed that there was such a manuscript. But it's possible. But if there is, we still don't know if it had esomenos instead of one of the other two participles or one of the other two forms of to be, or whether it had it in addition to them as a basis presenting it, and whether or not Hosios was there. But we're going to take out Hosios because of Beza. I'm not thrilled with that idea. But option three is that nearly all of the Greek manuscripts are right. Not just Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, not just two, not just the pre-10th century manuscripts, not just the pre-12th century manuscripts, but almost all of the Greek manuscripts have Hosios. There's a couple that are like just missing Hosios and a couple other words, but but virtually all, like 200 plus Greek manuscripts have Hosios, and they're right. That's one option. And that all the versions that are translating some equivalent of Hosios are right. Now, there's a couple of versions that don't include an equivalent of Hosios.
1 minute.
But they don't replace it with esomenos or an equivalent of esomenos. And then nearly all the commentaries throughout the patristic and Middle Ages are right. Now, there's not a lot, but there's none of them that talk about this issue, that somehow suggest that this is some substitution that was done. What about the idea that there's triads in Scripture? Well, there are, but more frequently there's dyads in Scripture, and this is just one of those cases. The one who is and the one who was. Well, is a name of God. It derives from the Tetragrammaton, of course. It goes back to Exodus 3:14. But the word holy is what John wrote. It's what he heard the angel say, whether he heard chesed, which is the Hebrew equivalent, or whether he heard hosios, which is the Greek. Either way, that's what John heard. That's what he wrote down under the inspiration of the Spirit, who, with the Father and the Son, are blessed forever. Amen.
Perfect. Wonderful debate, Nick and TurretinFan. We kept it civil, which is wonderful, but I wasn't expecting you guys to go all crazy anyway. You're two good dudes to be able to moderate for. So now what we'll do is before we bump into the Q&A, I did have a few people ask about the book, Nick. So why don't you just take like a minute here and let the audience know which book you're talking about and where they can get that. You're on mute.
I'll just go to my website, and I was approached by Old Paths Publications, and I had an article with this that I gave to James White, and they said, why don't you turn it into a book? And so I turned it into a book. Now, it does have TurretinFan's gone through it. He's pointed out some of the typographical errors and things like that are in there, but you'll get the gist if you read through that book. And so it's called the title is Revelation 16:5, Beza's expansion of the rare nomen sacrum form of Jehovah and I am in the final triadic declaration. And so it's quite a mouthful, but this will explain my scholarship up until 2019. I sort of feel like I could write another book of the same length as a part 2 to this. But yeah, so that's where you can get it is from Old Paths Publication, and I'll put that in the chat there if anyone wants to grab that book. And so, yeah.
All right. Excellent. Thanks, Nick. Now we're going to bring y'all back here. Now we have a couple questions. So just as a reminder to the audience, if you have a question, we have about 10 right now. So if you have a question, tag me. So just put the little @ symbol and then write Dwayne Green. I should pop up there in the YouTube comments. And then write out your question. And then I will flag that for being answered. We don't have any real structure to the Q&A other than I will just present the question and we will give both parties an opportunity to respond to that. If the question is for someone specific, we will direct that question to the specified person first and then give the other person an option to respond to that. So with that being said, I'm going to scroll all the way up to the top of our list here. And the first question we have is for Nick. Would ho-hosios just be an emendation from piety? If so, is it equivalent to using Lord, all caps, instead of Jehovah?
Would ho-hosios be an emendation from piety? If so, is it equivalent to using Lord instead of Jehovah? No. I would say ho-hosios is an indication of a nomina sacra. I wouldn't say that it is part of like the name of Jehovah or Lord or anything like that. Yeah, so I think it's quite a sort of like a yes or no type of answer, but I wouldn't say that ho-hosios is indicating anything to do with really the name of God, except for pointing out that it is a holy thing. It is a sacred name.
All right, TurretinFan, would you like to respond?
I would point out that hosios doesn't mean sacred. That would be hagios. That means sacred. Hosios is also translated as holy, but not in the sense of sacred. And then the expansion, there are such things as expansions of piety that we see sometimes in, of course, throughout the manuscript tradition, but especially sometimes in the later manuscripts, people adding the word Lord before Jesus Christ, or Jesus before Christ, or Christ after Jesus, or things like that, just to expand and make it more complete and seemingly more reverential. But maybe the insertion of there may be places where that's the case. I wouldn't find, of course, here.
All right. Okay. Next question we have from Christian Chidestar. Why do you think it wasn't until Beza that the variant was found? Did any of the early church, to your knowledge, have Beza's reading? This is for TurretinFan.
To my knowledge, none of them replaced hosios with asomenos in any, like all of the, none of the commentaries reflect such a substitution. However, there are some languages when the translation was made into the language that they didn't go with a present and an imperfect, like the Greek has for the two forms of to be that are in the Greek. So I think we talked about Beatus's Latin text, which comes from Tychonius, if I remember correctly, where it's speculated to come from Tychonius. It's thought to come from Tychonius. It has I think it is an imperfect and future, rather than present and imperfect. So that, and then there's something similar to that in the Ethiopic as well.
Nick?
I think it's because printing had only sort of just started, and so with printing the Greek text, obviously with the Complutensian Polyglot 1514, Erasmus's edition starting in 1516, and so looking at manuscripts to print them, it was only sort of a relatively new thing. It was less than 100 years old when Beza was looking at those things. And so his friend Tremelius, he was a Jewish guy who read fluent Hebrew, and he also did a Syriac Bible. His other friend Tremelius he did the Arabic. Ianius, he did the Arabic. So they worked on a Latin translation together. So I think with the influence of Hebrews, like Nehemiah Gordon, listening to his stuff, it's really opened my eyes to a lot of different things about the Hebrew language. And so I think Beza hanging around these guys, doing joint projects with them, it really helped him to understand etymology. It helped him to understand the names of God. And then he no doubt was looking for these things where before they mightn't have been looking for these differences. And so then he's found an ancient manuscript of this reading and said, that's an old faithful manuscript. And so he's gone with that. So that would explain why it was around that time, because I believe that the Nomina Sacra was actually understood by Greeks. I think that they understood that was the full name of God because of the other triadic declarations that had come before, but that had holy on it. So I'm yet to prove that. That's just my opinion.
All right. Okay, next question. This one is for you, TurretinFan. Do you hold to the Byzantine text or the critical text?
Not exactly, but in short, my textual methodology is, as far as the text that I typically start from for my personal reading and so forth, it's the King James. But in terms of if I'm trying to find out what's the Greek, and I'm actually start looking at the textual evidence, for almost any variant, I'll go with the majority of the manuscripts, because for almost all the variants that exist, the majority is correct. But in a few cases, there might, if someone is going to say, well, no, it shouldn't be the majority, it should be some minority reading, I would want to see a very good reason why that's the case. And the very good reason could be that the minority is all the earliest manuscripts, or maybe it's that there's other possible things that could move me away from the majority of manuscripts in particular cases. But those would be like out of the 30 or so variants, I forget the exact number. Let's say there's approximately 30 variants in Revelation 16:5. I would go, in my case, I go with the majority in all of them, and Nick would probably be going with the majority in all but 2 of them. So it's not that it's not like the result is going to be exactly in the. It's especially challenging to talk about the Byzantine text in Revelation because it's a bit complicated. But let's say outside Revelation, it's mostly it's going to look like the Byzantine text, but it's not. There's not that huge difference. Romans 5, as an example, I did happen to go through that looking for textual variants, and there was almost no difference between the critical text of Romans 5 and the Scrivener's TR at Romans 5. There's a couple of differences, maybe 2 variants, one the spelling of Moses and one other thing that I remember in the first half of the chapter. So anyway, hopefully that's enough answer.
All right. Nick, this is more directed at TurretinFan, but do you want to add in your textual persuasion? I think most of us know what it is.
Yes, I'm a Textus Receptus person, and so I believe that the readings of the King James are backed up by Beza's 1598 text. There's only about 20 differences between Beza's text and the King James. Now, Scrivener said there was 190 differences. And so he, 250 years after the King James, went to create the underlying text of that. He basically said, I use Beza's, but he introduced 190 places. 170 of those are not really translatable. but 20 are. So I haven't fully done that study yet, but I'm sort of like quarter of the way through, and it looks like only 10% are translatable differences. And so other people have actually done that, the DA Waite, and others have said that there's 20 differences between Beza and the King James. So I follow the underlying Greek text of the King James version. So sometimes that gets me labeled as a King James only, but hopefully people can see the difference between someone who doesn't go to Greek or whatever, doesn't go to Hebrew, and some of the the King James only people around who are I call them hyper King James only. But anyway, that's my position.
All right. Okay, so we're going to move on to Pastor Brett. It's a little bit spicy here. TurretinFan, why do you accuse Nick of creating a false storyline?
So I'm not 100% sure what Pastor Brett has in mind there. Just to clarify, I have high respect for Nick's integrity, and I don't think he's intentionally making false statements or lying or anything like that. So if something I said sounded like that, then I misspoke, or maybe I was misheard. I don't know. I'm not sure what Pastor Brett has in mind. But if his point is, why do I disagree with Nick and think that the Nick's account is not correct? Well, I mean, see the whole debate for that answer. I mean, I tried to give my best explanation, especially in the rebuttal section. I don't think that Nick's view on Nomina Sacra is the correct view. And I think if that part of Nick's position is not there, then there's not much else to hold up Nick's position. But no, as far as creating a false storyline, I certainly didn't mean to. I wouldn't put it that way myself, and I don't have anything but respect for Nick's integrity. So,
Nick, we'll give you an opportunity to respond.
Yes, I think it was in the part where TurretinFan was saying, who else has brought up this Nomina Sacra issue, which I think is a valid point to bring up, because it does look like I've just got this fanciful story. I've just brought it up and saying, well, it's a Nomina Sacra. But my point has been that for the past 150 to 200 years, scholars have not really been looking at this issue. And in fact, with the name of God, it seems to have slid backwards, where they're not really even saying the proper name, Jehovah, and looking at the building blocks of how Jehovah's name is built with the I ams, but they're saying it's Yahweh. They're saying, Gesenius said it was related to Jupiter. It was taken from the pagans, this type of thing. But then he retracted that, but it became a popular concept. And so I understand TurretinFan saying, where's this coming from? To me, when I read through Beza's annotations, now I was reading through Beza's annotations in Revelation 1:4 in Latin. No one had translated it. Now, I think maybe Erica Rummel, a few others had, but I didn't have access to their material. TurretinFan has since translated it. It's on his website. And so the more that I go through this material, the more that I see Jehovah, I ams, holy name, this type of thing. So, and I'm completely convinced of that concept that I first originally had. But I wouldn't say that it's an accusation. I think it's just more a general asking, where'd you get this from, Nick? And so I guess I'm saying, well, Revelation 1:4 in Beza's annotations.
All right, awesome. Now I'm going to pop this question up here. Question for TurretinFan. What do you think is of the parallel verses that say a similar thing in Revelation? Go ahead.
I feel it almost feels as though something might be
missing
from the question. But yeah, what do I think of the parallel? Let me just interpret it this way. What do I think of the parallel verses that say a similar thing? I think that the one who is and was the coming one is mentioned in 1:4 and 1:8. The one who was and is the coming one is mentioned in Revelation 4:8, and then the one who is and was is mentioned in Revelation 11. And there I agree with the majority of the manuscripts that don't include as well as I think the majority of the versions, which don't add in the coming one there. I don't know the exact count on versions at 11:17, but I believe that it is the majority. anyway, so I agree with that. It shouldn't be there, and part of the reason there is because of the context that he has already come in judgment at that point within the cycle that's described there in Revelation 11, and then in Revelation 16. Of course, we already talked about that one. So,
all right, Nick, do you want to respond real quick?
Yeah, I think knowing that Beza and a lot of the commentators say that this is the name of Jehovah in Revelation 1:4, with the reading who the past, the present, and the future there in a sense of who is and was and is to come, to me that indicates that they feel that all the triadic declarations are related to Jehovah, not just Revelation 16:5, which is the Revelation 16:5 with the shall be reading. It's got, the past eternity, the present now, and the future eternity, where is to come is like an event. It's like the past, the present, and Christmas sort of thing. But to me, that's just fitting in with the narrative of that God is going to come or Jesus is going to come. And so I think, to me, with the chiastic structure there, it's a great picture of the pattern that's in the book of Revelation there. And so whether John knew and understood that, or whether that's just the hand of God there, I'm not really into Bible numerics and all that sort of other stuff, but it is fascinating when you see a chiastic structure. Even if you just type it into Wikipedia and you look at a chiastic structure, a lot of them are to do with the Bible. And so, yeah, anyway, I think it's those, and I think that's why all of those issues are attacked. 1:4, 1:8, 4:8, that they are attacked in the critical text. And I think having the Textus Receptus, you don't have these issues of trying to figure out whether a reading's in or out or whatever. You've got this smooth text, and I think that's the way that God would have wanted it to be.
All right, very good. Okay, I'm going to take a look at a couple other ones here. There were some really good questions. Yeah, here's a good one. So this one's from Helga Evanson, and he asks, if a single 1200 year AD Greek manuscript was discovered with the Asomenos reading, would you then regard the reading as possibly original? I think he answered this in the debate, but I'll let you answer it again.
I was really hoping that I would find such a manuscript by looking at some of the ones that are not part of the data set that the ECM is based on, but I haven't found such a thing. I would love to find an example. I would love to be able to have proved Beza right by actually finding a manuscript that has Asomenos, and then I'd love to see what else is there. And, is it Asomenos, just two forms of 2b, and one of them is Asomenos? Is it three forms of 2b, and Asomenos is the third one, and Hozios isn't there? I would just love to see what this manuscript will look like. But would I think that one 13th century or end of the 12th century Greek manuscript would make this a possibly original reading? I mean, as I said, I'm almost always in favor of going with the vast majority readings. So it would have a very it would be, from my standpoint, it would be very unlikely. The other problem is that from my standpoint, it would look like this was a reading that was lost for a long time, and that would definitely bother me. But ultimately, it would increase the chances of this being an original reading from my standpoint almost zero, because there's some remote possibility that Beza actually did see a manuscript, to being higher than that, but still a very, very low possibility of being original. I would still confidently say it should be Hozios, even if there were like 3 manuscripts from the 1200s, not just one, that had exactly what the word Asomenos instead of Hozios.
All right, Nick.
Yeah, so I think because there's only 4 manuscripts that are before the 10th century, there's in the closed class of witnesses. So we look at the Latin, we look at the Greek, and we look at the early church writings, and we formulate. That's how the Textus Receptus was formulated. But when we look at the Latin, when we look at Hymo, when we look at Beatus of Libana, These things are 8th and 9th century. So I think it's very important to look outside of the Greek because we have such slim Greek before the 10th century. I would be surprised to see an Asomenos reading in something that late. I would think that type of reading would be in something earlier because it has been copied so frequently. Because, most people sort of know the Byzantine texts are cohesive. They're almost like rubber stamped, so even if it's got a mistake in it, that can get rubber stamped too. And so, but I think that it's almost inevitable that we will find something with this type of reading in it, because I'm so thoroughly convinced of the reading. So I'm just sort of like, well, let's keep looking. But to me, it does my confidence doesn't rise or fall on that because Beza said he had an old ancient manuscript. So to me, I believe that, and I believe that he had an old manuscript of good faith that had that reading. So I might be going back to before 1000 sort of thing with that reading.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to pull up this question here. I'll moderate this question here, so we'll leave out the portion about Acts 9, 5-6, just because that's not on topic. But the first part of the question, I think, is pertinent. So James Snap Jr. asks, does either debater believe that any conjecture whatsoever should be in the printed text of a biblically based text or biblical-based text? So this one isn't geared toward anyone specifically, but we'll start with TurretinFan and then go for Nick.
No, I mean, my short answer is I don't think that any conjecture whatsoever should be in the main text of any translation or Greek or Hebrew for the Old Testament text. I think we should just stick with what's been preserved for us. Now, I know in that I'm going slightly beyond the historical Francis Turretin, who seemed open to kind of rational conjectures to improve the text even after 1611. But I don't think we should. I think God has given us so much textual evidence that we don't have a need for that. But in if there is any place where it's needed, it would only be in some part of the Old Testament, and only because the transmission of the text is different there. But even those where there is some kind of conjecture needs to be extremely, extremely limited to things that we can derive from the text themselves, things that fall into the category of what Nick was talking about earlier, where you see the word onion in a document that's about founding a country, and you realize it can't be about onion, it has to be about union. So but generally speaking, for the New Testament, I don't think we should have any conjectures in the main text. If someone wants to put them in an apparatus, I think it's kind of a waste from the standpoint of people who are trying to do translation. It's interesting historically, but that's about it.
So I think when it comes to conjecture, like I don't see Revelation 16:5 as a conjecture. I know Jan Kranz didn't see it as this either because he was believing that Beza had a manuscript. He's recently sort of changed that in the last few years and said he believes that sort of Beza, tricked himself in a way and didn't have a manuscript but thought he had one. And so, but to me, when it comes to conjectural emendation, there's conjecture that is from all conjecture just means a change in the text. There's conjecture from evidence, and there's conjecture from evidence of manuscripts, and there's conjecture from the internal evidence. And sometimes the internal evidence cries out. You might have the Old Testament saying a certain thing, and then you have the New Testament, and it says something like, say, in Luke 2:22 with her purification. You can see her purification is in Leviticus chapter 12. I think it's like 6 or 7 times. But then when you get to the reading in Luke 2:22, it has their purification, which would include Jesus and the Father. And so having her purification, even though today extant manuscripts, we don't have that many. So because the Textus, people think the TR is based on the majority text because we've found so many since that time that back it up. But it's actually based upon the text that is correct and accurate. It's not just, oh, we've got 100 of these, so we have to go with it. Where that's just not the way the Textus Receptus was formulated. And so I don't go with conjecture. I know James White doesn't go with conjecture. He said he rejects the reading of the critical text at 2 Peter 3:10 with the Ook reading, and TurretinFan also rejects that as well. If I found conjectural emendation in the King James Textus Receptus, I would reject that as well.
All right, very good. Okay, so we are going to, I'm thinking 2 more questions, and I think that will respect all of our times here. So I've got one from Michelle Cherie, and then one from Kept Pure in All Ages. So I'm going to show you this one here. It says, for both, we'll start with Nick this time. Any thoughts that Beza may have regretted having changed the verse, looking at what God said about not adding, removing from his holy inspired word, assuming we know better?
I don't think anyone thought that of Beza. I don't think he thought that of himself. The King James translators put that reading in without any type of italic or marginal note or anything. And I think they all just saw it as an expansion of the holiest name of God, Jehovah, with the 3 I ams. And so to me, it's not, I don't pick up any trace of Beza regretting this. I know, who was it? Stephen Boyce, in our debate on the same topic, he had mentioned that there was a 1611 edition of Beza that reverted back the reading and had Ozios again, but it was actually a reprint of the 1565 edition. So it wasn't a new edition. It was just, sometimes they reprinted Erasmus and they reprinted Stephanus and they went back and reprinted old editions. And that's just what happened. And so that was mistakenly thought of. I think it was from Tim Berg saying that they'd reverted back, and the friends of Beza were ashamed of this reading, and they did a copy and they went against Beza and all this stuff. To me, that's reading into it. There's just no evidence of that whatsoever. This was thoroughly accepted by scholarship at the time, which I think at that point in time, biblical scholarship was very good. So yes, I would say that that's not possible. But yeah.
All right, TurretinFan.
I think it's an excellent question. We don't have any explicit statement from Beza that he regretted it. We do have the 1588 Geneva Bible, for which Theodore Beza was an editor, which does include holy as a marginal note, like an alternative reading as a marginal note there. And the States Bible, the Dutch Statenvertaling, I think is how it's pronounced. Anyway, that the Dutch State Bible has similarly the holy in the margin. The successor of Beza, Diodati, did not go with it for his Italian Bible. He didn't follow Beza for his Italian Bible. And so I think we could conclude that at least Diodati didn't accept this modification, and that there were people in Geneva at the time, even in Theodore Beza's lifetime, that had some questions about this, that weren't sure that he's right. Otherwise, they wouldn't put such a marginal note. It takes extra effort to put it in. The King James editors, for example, they seem to have a higher confidence. They didn't put a marginal note indicating holy, but the so-called Belgic translators of the Dutch State Bible and the French Geneva Bible both put that as a marginal note because they seemed to be less confident about this reading. So is that evidence that Beza regretted it? I think his true regret would be expressed by changing it in his 1598, which he didn't do. So I think I'm not comfortable saying, yeah, he definitely regretted it.
All right, great. Thanks for your answers. And we will now move on to the last question here. And this comes from Christian McShaffrey at Kept Pure in All Ages. He asks, to both of you, how would adopting your preferred reading with the methodology that rests behind it practically benefit my faith? We'll start with you, TurretinFan. Adopting
the reading that's found in all the Greek manuscripts virtually all the Greek manuscripts here, is beneficial doctrinally. It's beneficial in terms of providing further connection back to Revelation 15:4, the Song of Moses that's mentioned there. This song speaks about the covenantal relationship, the willingness to adhere to the covenantal duties that God has imposed on himself. This very unlike Greek deities that don't have any obligations to mankind, God has voluntarily covenanted himself to his people to do, among other things, to protect them and to be their vengeance on their enemies. And the martyrs in Revelation 6 call out for vengeance, and God tells them, no, be patient. There's more, basically, to paraphrase, there's more martyrs coming. In Revelation 14, we see the beast persecute people who don't worship the beast. And then we see in Revelation 15 that those who have overcome this beast, in other words, they didn't succumb to his demands, but instead passed on into glory, are now there. And now in Revelation 16, this 7 angels are bringing their judgments onto the earth, including turning the rivers to blood, which is symbolic of the people who previously shed blood are now being forced to drink blood. And that the point of that is that's a just punishment for those people. So having Hozios here, which is equivalent to the Hebrew Hesed, is a reminder to us of his covenant faithfulness, and that wouldn't be completely lost, of course, if you don't have it there, but it would be weakened if you don't have it here in the text. It's one of the few places in Revelation. It's one of only 2 places in Revelation where it's mentioned, and the other being in 15:4.
All right, Nick, go ahead.
So I would say that adopting this preferred reading with the methodology that rests behind it, I think that it would unify the Bible. When we look at the I ams, when we look at the name of Jehovah, we see that this was known by the Hebrews, this was known by John, and John indicating that Christ is coming, but using this type of methodology, he's jealous to show that Jesus is Jehovah. I think this is a huge untapped place of study. In my book, I talk about Jesus being Jehovah and things like that. And so to me, that this fits in. To me, there's no error or solecism in the Textus Receptus. It causes people to put their trust in the Word of God because of the previous patterns. That it is a solid reading. It's not got half a name of God there. It has the full name of God. The methodology that rests behind it, to me, is very practical. You don't find the name of Jesus in Matthew 1:1 in any of the manuscripts, but it is there. And so, but it is in a coded form that we label nomina sacra. So to me, this type of coding around the name of Jehovah, if we study the Old Testament and how that was translated into many different languages, many times, even the Jews today have G-D. They don't even say the name of God, and they say Hashim for Jehovah or Donai and all these other names. So having holy there, to me, is very practical. And how that it would affect your faith, it just makes, in me doing this study, to me, it's shown me how perfect the Bible is, how it's like looking at a design, like fabric put together. It creates a pattern that we can see. It creates, it increases my faith that God's hand is on every word, every jot and tittle, and there is no error in the Word of God at all, and it's not confusing. And so, yeah, hopefully that helps.
All right. Well, thank you for Nick, TurretinFan, for your ironic debate style. It was very informative. I've learned a tremendous amount of stuff. I know Revelation, textually speaking, is one of the more difficult books of the New Testament. But I think you both did really well. It was good to see, Nick, your work on display, and TurretinFan, you clearly see that you studied up and were ready to go. So wonderful debate. Apologies to those who asked questions and I wasn't able to get to them. However, tomorrow is Resurrection Day. And so I will just say happy Resurrection Day prematurely to everybody who's watching. And again, wonderful debate. Thank you, gentlemen. I will turn this over to you, Nick, and you will do what you will do.
Yeah, I really appreciate you, Dwayne, for moderating there, and TurretinFan for jumping on board. And I take my hat off to you and the amount of work that you've done on your website. And, I'm going through some of those commentaries and looking at stuff. There's just a lot of material there, and even just putting material on that's sort of neutral. It doesn't affect either side. It's just stuff there. I really appreciate all the hard work that you've done. And so, yeah, I think this has been a great debate. And I am going to do an after show. I just noticed someone was going to ask, or someone did ask that. And so, yeah, I will do an after show probably in about 15 minutes after this wraps up. But yeah, I think that's about it, Dwayne, unless you've got anything else to say, or TurretinFan, if you've got anything you want to add.
I just want to add a thank you to Dwayne. I really appreciate that you were willing to moderate. And maybe Nick and I don't throw tomatoes at each other and cause problems, but it's not an easy job keeping track of the time and keeping track of the questions and trying to be a fair moderator. It's not easy, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, TurretinFan. All right. I'm going to zip off.
I'll play my outro, and everyone will be muted, and then I'll stop that, and then I'll see you guys in the after show if you can make it.
All right. Take care, guys.
Cheers.